Chapter 5408. Since it's a marriage that represents the formal union of the two clans, it's a first-class event for both the Yi Ling sect and our Chu family. The marriage partner sent by both sides must undoubtedly be the successor of their respective forces. Only in this way can the Yi Ling sect and the Chu family be fully integrated into a force after the children of the two parties are born, and they can gain a foothold in the Middle Island and even the entire Archaic Alliance, Chu Tianliang continued. Hearing this, Chu Tianlu, as the person involved, did not seem to have reacted, but Lin Yi, a bystander, could already guess what was going on. Obviously, the reason why Chu Tianliang schemed against Chu Tianlu was not for the spirit knowledge fruit, but for the marriage. I don't think I need to say more about who Duanmuyu is. Looking at the younger generation of the Archaic Alliance, she's definitely one of the top geniuses. There's no doubt about her status in the Yi Ling sect. Whoever marries her will be the successor of our Chu family, and they'll also get a great opportunity to enter the Yi Ling sect in the future. There's no doubt about this. Chu Tianliang's eyes shone as he spoke. Although their Chu family had a nascent soul-old monster, and compared to ordinary sects and families, they were already in existence that stood out. Compared to the 10 small sects and families, they were still not worth mentioning. Even if they had a nascent soul-old monster, it was useless. The reason for this was that their foundation and potential in other aspects were too lacking. Not to mention other things, just the most important core strength alone, the Chu family could not be compared to the 10 small sects and families like the Yi Ling sect. The number of gold core experts in any of the 10 small sects and families was more than double digits, and some even had 20 or 30. Looking at the Chu family, there were only 2 gold core experts below the nascent soul-old monster level. The gap between them was obvious. In contrast, due to the fact that they had spent a lot of money to cultivate their reserve forces in recent years, the gap between the younger generation of the Chu family and the traditional aristocratic families like the Yi Ling sect seemed to be much smaller. At least in terms of the number of disciples at the great perfection of foundation establishment and the peak late foundation establishment, there seemed to be little difference at first glance. However, this was completely an illusion. Although they were both at the peak of the late stage of the foundation establishment realm, their strength and potential might be as different as heaven and earth. Geniuses like Ling Tianyu and Duan Muyu were destined to have boundless futures, but for the vast majority of experts at their level, it was already a blessing to be able to reach the threshold of the gold core realm, or even to be stuck there for the rest of their lives. Among the younger generation of the Chu clan, the 2 people who were in the limelight the most were precisely Chu Tianlu and Chu Tianliang. The former was a bit better in terms of talent and strength, but even so, he was far from being able to compare to the likes of Duanmuyu. Duanmuyu was an influential figure that received much discussion in the ancient Jianghu, while they were a group of people that were never paid attention to. Now, an opportunity had suddenly appeared in front of them, giving them the opportunity to form a marriage alliance with Duanmuyu. This was completely unimaginable in the past, so it was no wonder that Chu Tianliang was so excited. After all, he had once seen Duanmuyu with his own eyes. In addition to her somewhat heroic spirit, she could be considered to have a beautiful face and a good figure. In addition, she had the strength and status behind her. At that time, he had such a feeling that if he could conquer such a woman in bed one day, what more could he ask for in life? The discussion of the clan's upper hand was almost over, and the matter of the marriage alliance was already a foregone conclusion. Duanmuyu was close at hand, and Chu Tianliang's heart was really itching. Unfortunately, this matter was far from being in the bag. If nothing unexpected happened, the candidate sent by the Chu clan for the marriage alliance would definitely be either him or Chu Tianlu. Compared to the 2 of them, the other younger generation of the Chu clan were either lacking in strength or bloodline background, and would not be considered at all. Chu Tianliang had long coveted Duanmuyu, so he would naturally think of ways to get rid of Chu Tianlu before the candidate for the marriage alliance was finally decided. Not only was Duanmuyu the grandson of the clan leader, but Duanmuyu's strength was also a notch higher than his. This was the biggest obstacle in front of him. That was why he had schemed so hard to fall out with Chu Tianlu. Tai Snake Island was the best opportunity to get rid of Chu Tianlu. For this, he had spent a great deal of effort to persuade his father, and did not hesitate to find someone to rent 2 additional entry slots. It was all for the sake of bringing in these 2 helpers by his side. Otherwise, let alone killing Chu Tianlu, it would already be good if he was not killed instead. I have no plans to fight with you over Duanmu Yu. Only now did Chu Tianlu suddenly understand the other party's intentions. He had always been focused on cultivation and very rarely paid attention to gossip unrelated to cultivation. Even this time, he was one of the last to find out about the marriage alliance with the Leaf Spirit sect. He had no interest in Duanmu Yu at all. He never expected that he would actually become a thorn in Chu Tianliang's side because of this. He was completely innocent. Is that so? Chu Tianliang narrowed his eyes when he heard this. He clearly did not believe him. Just as he was about to order people to make a move, the initial Oris Core stage expert next to him suddenly came over. This person was called Chu Wanshang and was the only Oris Core stage expert in the Chu family. If it wasn't for the fact that he was separated by a few generations from the ancestral family by blood relations, he might have been chosen as the next family head. Even if he wasn't good enough, he would have been able to mix his way into the position of a top-notch elder with real power. He wouldn't be like now, where he only had the empty title of a top-notch elder. Of course, if it wasn't for the fact that his position was awkward, Chu Wanshang wouldn't have appeared here today. After all, as an elder of the initial Oris Core stage, it was a bit shameful for him to come out and fight for a junior like Chu Tianliang. However, for the sake of profit, Chu Wanshang finally pinched his nose and agreed. 1,000 spirit jades. This was the price that Chu Tianliang offered. If it wasn't for his father, who was in charge of the entire Chu family's finances, he wouldn't have been able to take out such a hard-earned capital. Chu Wanshang didn't even think about it and agreed on the spot. Don't forget that this was Tai Snake Island, the legendary place where the Divine Awareness fruit was produced. If he ran out and killed someone, not only would he get 1,000 spirit jades, he might even have the chance to obtain the Divine Awareness fruit. Why not? Tianliang, why don't you give him a chance? Chu Wanshang said. Seeing Chu Tianliang begin to frown, he added, he inexplicably jumped down here today. I think there must be a problem here. Maybe there will be an unexpected harvest? Chu Tianliang hesitated. Although Chu Wanshang's position in the family was somewhat awkward, his strength was still there. In particular, his father, in order to obtain the position of the next patriarch, needed to vigorously rope in this important expert. At present, in order to deal with Chu Tianlu, he needed to rely on the other party. Chu Wanshang's words really couldn't be ignored. But the problem was, if Chu Tianlu really found the Divine Awareness fruit, what should he do? Could it be that he really let the other party go? Compared to the Divine Awareness fruit, in Chu Tianliang's eyes, the marriage with Duanmu Yu was obviously much more important. If he couldn't get rid of Chu Tianlu this time, it would be equivalent to alerting the enemy. After returning to the Middle Island, he would no longer have any chance. Don't worry, it's hard to say whether he can find it or not. Moreover, even if he really finds it, won't you still have the final say? Chu Wanshang sneered silently. Chu Tianliang's eyes lit up. He pretended to hesitate for a moment, then nodded and said, Okay, if you can find the Divine Awareness fruit, I promise to let you go this time. But you also have to promise not to fight with me over Duanmu Yu after we return. Otherwise, don't blame me for being ruthless. I have no interest in Duanmu Yu. It's a deal. Chu Tianlu did not doubt him and immediately turned to lead the way. Chu Tianliang and Chu Wanshang glanced at each other, then brought another Peak Late Foundation establishment expert and followed closely behind. They thought that the mantis stalked the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind. An hour later, Chu Tianlu had already brought everyone to the deepest part of the cave. Everything was calm and peaceful along the way. Regardless of who it was, such a mysterious and unfathomable underground cave would definitely be a place where danger lurked on all sides. They never expected that forget about terrifying vicious beasts, there wasn't even a fly to be seen. It was like a paradise, a complete mess. Where's the Divine Awareness fruit? You've led us in circles for so long. Chu Tianlu, you can't be purely trying to stall for time, right? Chu Tianliang was starting to get impatient. Not only him, even Chu Wanshang beside him started to show impatience. The reason why he believed Chu Tianlu was completely because of this guy's miraculous discovery of this underground cave. Unfortunately, from the looks of it, This guy's miraculousness seemed to end here. I'm not going in circles. Chu Tianlu suddenly stopped and turned around to look at Chu Tianliang and the other two. The divine awareness fruit has been found. Where? Everyone was shocked at the same time and couldn't help but look all around. In the end, there was nothing. You dare trick us? Chu Tianliang was about to become hostile on the spot. If Chu Wenshang hadn't spoken, he would have already attacked just now. Now that he had confirmed that the other party was deliberately mystifying and stalling for time, there was naturally no need to continue wasting time. Chapter 54:10. It's here. Everyone was even more confused. Apart from some seaweed that could be seen everywhere, there was clearly nothing else. So where did the divine knowledge fruit come from? It seems that they really don't know. Chu Tianlu's expression became more and more strange. Because the Chu family had always had a quota for Tai Snake Island by chance, they had collected quite a lot of ancient books related to the divine knowledge fruit. As long as they made proper preparations, they could obtain a lot of information about the divine knowledge fruit. At the very least, it would be much more abundant than the hearsay in the outside world. However, from the looks of it, Chu Tianliang and the others clearly hadn't put in any effort in this aspect. After speaking, Chu Tianlu bent down and squatted down, finding a rather oddly shaped black stone at his feet. At first glance, it seemed unremarkable, but if one observed it carefully, they would discover that the shape of this black stone was extremely similar to a triangular poisonous snake head. In particular, there were various sinister spots on its surface, which made people tremble with fear. Chu Tianliang and the others still had stupefied expressions. Chu Tianlu picked up the black stone as he explained. Everyone knows that the divine knowledge fruit is shaped like a snake gallbladder and is even said to be transformed from the gallbladder of the Tai snake clan. However, it can't just be a snake gallbladder growing outside, right? According to the records of the ancient strange records, the survival rate of the Tai snake clan is extremely low. More than 90% of the young snakes will die prematurely, and among these young snakes that die prematurely, an extremely small number will be buried in the ground and petrified. Among the petrified young snakes, an extremely small number will condense the essence of the Tai snake clan, which is the legendary divine knowledge fruit. As he spoke, Chu Tianlu carefully removed the black stone from the ground. Chu Tianliang and the others' eyelids all jumped. This black stone really did look like a snake head, and there was actually a long pitch-black snake body attached to it. However, it was a petrified snake body. At first glance, it really did look like a living snake. Chu Tianliang and the others were already mostly convinced by this strange shape. One by one, their breathing immediately became hurried. After all, this was the legendary divine knowledge fruit. Even Chu Tianliang, who had his eyes set on marriage alliances, couldn't help but feel his heart beat wildly at the thought of being able to immediately obtain the divine knowledge fruit. On this trip to Tai Snake Island, getting rid of Chu Tianlu was his primary goal, but if he could obtain the divine knowledge fruit, that would be an enormous surprise. It would be a waste to not have it. Give it to me quickly. Chu Tianliang began to be impatient. He wished he could snatch the petrifying Tai snake into his hands. Wait, we agreed before that I'll give you the divine knowledge fruit, and from then on, we'll mind our own business. Chu Tianlu wasn't so naive that he couldn't be saved. Of course, I swear on my family's name that I won't go back on my word. As long as you don't ruin my plans after we return, it's fine. Chu Tianliang's face was filled with sincerity. Okay, but I can't give it to you here. I'll give it to you as soon as I get back to Middle Island. Chu Tianlu didn't believe the other party's oath that easily. Just for the sake of competing for a marriage alliance candidate, he didn't hesitate to kill his brother of several decades. If he believed in the other party's character, then it could only prove one thing. His brain really was flooded with water. Chu Tianlu didn't believe in Chu Tianliang, and it was very obvious that Chu Tianliang didn't believe in this cousin of his at all. It should be known that the conspiracy on Tai Snake Island this time absolutely couldn't be exposed, especially to the patriarch grandfather who had recently advanced to the nascent soul stage. Otherwise, not only would all the previous plans fail, but it would also bring trouble to himself. Most importantly, once Chu Tianlu returned to Middle Island, he would be like a fish in water, and they would never have the chance to make a move again. At that time, even if Chu Tianlu went back on his word and didn't give them the divine knowledge fruit, what could they do? Chu Tianlu, my patience is limited. Don't push your luck. Chu Tianliang's face immediately darkened. This time, no matter what, he wouldn't let the other party return to Middle Island, even if he didn't want the divine knowledge fruit. Did I push my luck? Didn't we agree on this? Or, did you never intend to let me return to Middle Island alive? Chu Tianlu looked at the three people in front of him and didn't show much nervousness. Logically, in this situation, he was the fish on the chopping block. His life or death was all in the hands of the other party. After all, there was an early-stage gold core stage expert on the other side. Once they made a move, he wouldn't be able to escape at all. Humph, I really let you. Chu Tianliang grinned coldly. Just as he was about to turn hostile, Chu Wenshang, who was next to him, suddenly interrupted. Tianlu, it shouldn't be a problem for me to be the guarantor for the matter between you two brothers, right? Chu Tianlu frowned, paused for a moment, and said, Okay, I trust Uncle Wenshang's character, but it's absolutely impossible for me to hand over the divine knowledge fruit here. Since it's like this, then let's each take a step back. After we get out of here, you give us the divine knowledge fruit, and we give you the only flying spiritual beast. That shouldn't be a problem, right? Chu Wenshang thought of a compromise. After hearing this, Chu Tianliang immediately frowned, but after noticing the other party's eyes, he held back and didn't speak. Okay, Chu Tianlu readily agreed. He also knew that it was unrealistic to return to Central Island unscathed in this situation. If he could really use the divine knowledge fruit to exchange for a flying spiritual beast, although there would still be some risks, it was better than wasting time here. A long night was fraught with trouble, and if Chu Tianliang's patience was exhausted, there would be no point in talking. Okay, then it's settled. Chu Wenshang nodded, and then said, But before that, shouldn't you let us verify the divine knowledge fruit with our own eyes? This snake stone does look a bit mysterious, but seeing is believing. Who knows if there really is a spiritual knowledge fruit inside? This? Chu Tianlu hesitated for a moment. The thing in his hand was his only bargaining chip, but as Chu Wenshang said, if he couldn't prove that there was a divine knowledge fruit inside, there was not much room for him to bargain with the other party. So he immediately nodded and said, Okay. As he said this, Chu Tianlu suddenly exerted force in his hand, and the petrified snake body rapidly disintegrated section by section. After a while, there was a pile of black gravel at his feet, but everyone's eyes were fixed on his right hand. In Chu Tianlu's right hand, there was a small dark red object lying quietly, like a living thing. It looked very much like a snake gallbladder, but the strangest thing was that this suspected snake gallbladder was exuding a strong, almost suffocating snake smell, and it was even pulsing weakly. Divine knowledge fruit. Everyone gulped. At this time, even if their eyesight was poor, they could see that this must be the legendary divine knowledge fruit. Chapter 54:11. Jumping into the sea and finding this underground cave with the help of God, and then finding the spirit knowledge fruit with the help of God. If this was not God, what was? There should be no problem now, right? Chu Tianlu said to Chu Tianliang and the other three. Chu Tianliang snorted coldly and did not answer, but Chu Wenshang's attitude towards the spirit knowledge fruit was obviously much more enthusiastic. A smile suddenly appeared on his face. Well, no problem, but Heavenly Road. Since it's rare to come here, why not continue to look around? Maybe there are other spirit knowledge fruits? No, this is the only one. Chu Tianlu shook his head decisively. What do you mean? Chu Wenshang's expression froze. People were always greedy. Spirit knowledge fruits were good things that could only be encountered by chance, so the more the better. Although he did not know why Chu Tianlu was so amazing, it would not be a bad thing if he could get a few more spirit knowledge fruits. He did not expect Chu Tianlu to flatly refuse. It's not that I don't want to find them, but rather that the divine knowledge fruits are mutually exclusive. Any divine knowledge fruit can only take shape after gathering a large amount of young Tai Shi's soul essence. Thus, there has never been a precedent of twins or multiple births. Normally, they can't be found. Even if they can be found, there will only be one, and no more. Everything I've said is based on ancient texts. I didn't make it up. Okay, I understand. Chu Wenshang nodded and suggested, since there are no other spirit knowledge fruits, there is no point in staying here. To avoid trouble, why don't we go out now? Chu Tianliang was still in a dilemma. If there were a few more spirit knowledge fruits, it would be fine, but one spirit knowledge fruit was not even enough for him to share with Chu Wenshang. If he let Chu Tianlu go like this, it would be too easy for him. He was really unwilling. Okay, but don't try anything funny, otherwise I will crush the spirit knowledge fruit and die with you. Of course, Chu Tianlu couldn't ask for more. From the very beginning, he didn't have the idea of taking the spirit knowledge fruit for himself. This was a bargaining chip he used to protect himself. If he couldn't find it today, he would really die here. No problem. In order to show his sincerity, Chu Wenshang indicated for Chu Tianliang to take the lead and walk in front of him. He and the other Peak Late Foundation establishment expert also walked in front of Chu Tianlu. This way, no matter what little movement they made, it would fall into Chu Tianlu's eyes, and they wouldn't have to worry about any small movements behind their backs. Chu Tianlu sighed in relief, but he didn't relax his guard because of this. Before safely returning to the middle island, he definitely didn't dare to lower his guard in the slightest. Earlier, he said he believed in Chu Wenshang's character, but that was just lip service. Since Chu Wenshang was helping Chu Tianliang to deal with him, it meant that there had definitely been a deal behind the scenes. Trusting him would be courting death. However, before he even took 2 steps, Chu Tianlu's eyelids suddenly jumped. Chu Wenshang's silhouette suddenly became indistinct. Due to the fluorescence of seaweed everywhere, although the light in this underground cave was not comparable to the light outside, it was not weak either. The shadows inside were very obvious, but because of the irregular distribution of seaweed, the shadows were not quite the same as outside. Chu Tianlu's perception wasn't weak. Even if the shadows suddenly became indistinct, under this type of environment, it would be very difficult for anyone else to notice it. After all, with every step they took, their shadows would change irregularly, but he was able to distinguish them quite quickly. However, even though this was the case, it was still too late. The instant the shadow became indistinct, another silhouette silently stuck to Chu Tianlu's back. Then, it quickly became tangible. It was actually Chu Wenshang. Shadow-sticking steps. The instant Chu Tianlu sensed all of this, his heart went cold. Although the cultivation methods were more or less the same, every single sect and family in the archaic world had their own symbolic characteristics. Even the Middle Island's Chu family, which couldn't even compare to the 10 small sects and families, still had their own unique symbolic ability, shadow. Just like how the essence of the leaf spirit sect came from leaves, almost all of the Chu family's cultivation methods and moves revolved around shadows. Among them, their movement techniques were especially praised. Wherever the shadow went, the person would follow. This was the Chu family's shadow-sticking steps. As the Chu family's most outstanding young disciple, Chu Tianlu actually also knew the shadow-sticking steps. After all, he was already an expert at the Great Circle of Foundation establishment. However, even if they both used the shadow-sticking steps, when he used it, it was completely different from when Chu Wenshang used it. Chu Tianlu's shadow-sticking steps could only be used in a well-behaved manner. Wherever the shadow went, the person would follow. At most, he could be considered to have learned it. However, Chu Wenshang was an expert at the initial golden core stage. His strength and realm were completely different. He had almost mastered the shadow-sticking steps. To a certain extent, he could even actively change the trajectory of his shadow, appearing and disappearing unpredictably. Once the shadow-sticking steps was used, Chu Wenshang immediately arrived behind Chu Tianlu. The distance between them was less than a step, and he was practically stepping on Chu Tianlu's heel. If an expert at the initial golden core stage got so close, the consequences would be unthinkable. Without a doubt, everything Chu Wenshang said before was to numb Chu Tianlu. From start to finish, his goal was the divine knowledge fruit. At the same time, he didn't play around with his agreement with Chu Tianliang. To put it simply, he wanted the divine knowledge fruit, as well as the 1,000 spirit jades. Tianlu, my apologies. The corners of Chu Wenshang's mouth curled up into a cold smile. In his hand, a short blade was already pressed against Chu Tianlu's neck. Because they all relied on shadows to survive, their various martial skills were inclined towards appearing and disappearing unpredictably. The Chu clan's experts basically all walked the path of assassins, and he was no exception. The blade streaked across, but to Chu Wenshang's great surprise, there was no obstruction from the blade. His blade, which he was determined to win, actually streaked across the air. How is this possible? Chu Wenshang's heart jumped. He believed that there shouldn't have been any flaws in his previous act. To a certain extent, he should have already numbed Chu Tianlu. Yet this brat's reaction was actually this fast? Chu Tianlu's reaction was indeed fast. Not only did he dodge Chu Wenshang's blade in a moment of imminent peril, he even immediately counterattacked. The target of his counterattack wasn't Chu Tianlu, but Chu Tianliang, who was walking in front of him. Shadow-sticking steps. It was the same shadow-sticking steps. Chu Tianlu admittedly couldn't appear and disappear unpredictably like Chu Wenshang, but Chu Tianliang's position in front of him was really too perfect. In particular, this guy's reaction was extremely slow. Even now, he unexpectedly still didn't know that Chu Wenshang had already made a move against him. If not him, then who should he look for? What are you doing? Chu Tianliang was immediately shocked when Chu Tianlu's short blade suddenly pressed against his neck. He didn't dare to move at all. Chapter 54:12. Let's talk about it. Don't be impulsive. Chu Wenshang hurriedly agreed. Although it seemed to be just a deal between him and Chu Tianliang, if Chu Tianliang died here, he would not be able to live in peace after returning to the Middle Island. Chu Tianliang's father would definitely find trouble with him. He was a ruthless character who held great financial power. Even an expert in the early gold core stage like him could not afford to offend him. Chu Tianlu, if you dare to touch even half of my hair today, I guarantee that you will die without a complete corpse. Chu Tianliang was still putting on a brave front. Hee, if I didn't react quickly just now, I would have died without a complete corpse. Chu Tianlu snorted disdainfully and said coldly, I originally wanted to give the divine knowledge fruit to you, but now I've changed my mind. Even if I die here today, I will drag you down with me. As he spoke, the dagger in his hand had already pierced half an inch into Chu Tianliang's neck. Immediately, blood gushed out. Chu Tianliang was so scared that he collapsed. He did not dare to move at all, and did not even dare to speak nonsense. Wait, don't be impulsive. I'll let you go, Chu Wenshang hurriedly advised, but his eyes were paying attention to the surrounding light. He knew very well that in this situation, the problem could not be solved by negotiation. The only solution was to find a good angle and use the shadow step again. Only in this way could he regain the initiative. Okay, but Uncle Wenshang, you don't have to waste your time looking for an angle. Being hit by your shadow step once is enough to make people tremble in fear. If you do it again, maybe my hand will shake and I will really kill him. At that time, should I count his life on your head or mine? Chu Tianlu said vigilantly. Don't worry, I won't do such a stupid thing, or else I won't be able to explain it to the patriarch. Don't you think so? Since the other party had seen through him, Chu Wenshang could only give up this plan and think of another way. Chu Wenshang spread his hands and retreated. Only when he retreated 20 steps away did Chu Tianlu let out a sigh of relief. This distance had already far exceeded the range of the shadow step. As long as he ensured that he didn't give his opponent an opportunity to take advantage of, even if Chu Wenshang was an expert of the initial gold core stage, he wouldn't be able to catch him unprepared. As long as he left behind a sliver of opportunity to react, Chu Tianliang would become a dead soul under his blade. Now that things had developed to this point, Chu Tianlu no longer cared about any brotherly affection, nor did he think about what the consequences would be if he killed Chu Tianliang here. Right now, surviving was the most important thing. Chu Wenshang, on the other hand, was extremely cooperative. After all, if something really happened to Chu Tianliang, even if he could get rid of Chu Tianlu, it would be meaningless. At that time, regardless of whether it was the Chu family's master or Chu Tianliang's father, they would both vent their anger on him, and from then on, he would no longer have a foothold in the Chu family. However, even if he used his toes to think, Chu Wenshang's cooperation was limited to the surface. In his heart, he must still have various plans. He just couldn't find a suitable opportunity. As long as Chu Tianlu showed the slightest bit of relaxation or flaw, this guy would definitely attack immediately. Chu Tianlu himself was well aware of this. In fact, for him, the biggest problem at the moment was how to get out of here. Normally, it would not be difficult to climb back to the cliff from here. At least, for experts above the foundation establishment stage, it would be a piece of cake. However, the problem was that he was threatening Chu Tianliang at the moment, and there was an expert in the early gold core stage like Chu Wenshang eyeing him covetously. The whole process had to be done without the slightest flaw, which was really difficult. Lin Yi was still watching coldly from afar. He had no intention of intervening. Since he saw the legendary divine knowledge fruit here, he would definitely not let it go. Although he did not do things like killing people and stealing their treasures, he had never been a gentleman. After muddling around in the cultivation world for so many years, Lin Yi's mentality had long been adapted to the local customs. Even if he did not have the habit of killing people, stealing treasures was not a problem. However, now was the time to watch the show, so there was no need to rush to make a move. As a bystander, Lin Yi was already able to roughly deduce the interests of these people through the conversation from before. Even though Chu Tianlu was in imminent danger at this moment, as far as he was concerned, the method to deal with this situation was extremely simple. The key to breaking the situation was not strength. In fact, with the strength of the peak of foundation establishment, unless it was a super genius like Ling Tianyu who could challenge those of a higher realm, Chu Tianlu had no chance of winning. The key was the awareness. No matter how Chu Tianlu was, Lin Yi thought that if he was in his position, and his strength was only at the peak of foundation establishment, he would definitely not hesitate to slit Chu Tianliang's throat in front of Chu Wenshang. This was not a simple impulse, but a deliberate decision, and it could be said to be the only feasible way to break the situation. There were two reasons. One was to eliminate future troubles. For Chu Tianlu, killing Chu Tianliang, his younger cousin, would no doubt have no small repercussions, but it was still much better than leaving him alive. Being stared at by such a poisonous snake would bring him endless troubles, so it was better to cut the Gordian knot quickly. Second, if he directly killed Chu Tianliang at this time, not only would Chu Wenshang not fly into a rage out of humiliation and start a massacre, it was extremely likely that he would choose to bide his time, and might even turn around and help Chu Tianlu on the spot. The reason was very simple. As long as Chu Wenshang wasn't an idiot, he should be able to distinguish the pros and cons. As long as Chu Tianliang died, no matter what kind of deal he reached with Chu Tianliang and his father, they were bound to fall apart. At this time, even if he killed Chu Tianlu, there was nothing he could do to remedy the situation. On the contrary, the two most outstanding young disciples of the Chu family had both died on Tai Snake Island, both under his eyes. Even if Chu Wenshang jumped into the Yellow River, he definitely wouldn't be able to wash his name clean. Even if he didn't die, he would lose a layer of skin. That was why, if Chu Tianliang truly died under Chu Tianlu's hands, the best choice for Chu Wenshang wasn't to take action against Chu Tianlu. Rather than doing a strenuous and unrewarding task, it would be better to simply stand at Chu Tianlu's side and provide him with timely assistance. Like this matter would become a private fight between two cousins. When he, Chu Wenshang, returned, he would at most receive a complaint of lax supervision, but wouldn't receive any substantial punishment. If his resolution and boldness were a bit greater, he could even stand out and testify against Chu Tianliang and his father's plot. As long as he could endure until Chu Tianlu took over, there was no need to doubt the rewards at that time. Strictly speaking, this kind of simple and clear way to break the situation wasn't hard to think of. Unfortunately, the onlookers saw the game more clearly than the players. Even an outsider like Lin Yi could see things clearly, but Chu Tianlu, who was in the game, couldn't turn things around so quickly. Right now, he was even fretting over how to force Chu Tianliang to leave. Chapter 54:13. Chu Tianlu really couldn't be sure. No matter which option he chose, it would be extremely dangerous. It was very difficult for him to not give Chu Wenshang an opportunity to take advantage of, but if he continued to stay in this cave, what would he do when the tide rose? In reality, this wasn't the most dangerous thing. From the moment Chu Tianlu jumped into the sea, he already knew that today was a disaster. Tianlu, continuing this deadlock isn't a solution. Why don't you hurry up and leave? Chu Wenshang urged. Chu Tianlu hesitated for a moment and finally nodded. I'll go out first. You guys stay 60 feet away from me. If you take a step closer, I'll kill him. Okay. Chu Wenshang agreed, but before he finished speaking, the expert at the peak of the late Foundation establishment realm on the other side suddenly launched an attack. His figure turned into a black shadow and pounced towards Chu Tianlu. He was immediately shocked. Xingping, you're crazy. This person was called Chu Xingping. His strength could be considered outstanding among the younger generation of the Chu family. However, he was different from Chu Tianlu and Chu Tianliang. He wasn't a descendant of the ancestral family, so no matter how strong his strength was, it was useless. He was destined to only serve as a foil to the two. In the past, he was rarely noticed by others, and had always appeared in front of everyone as Chu Tianliang's attendant. Not only Chu Wenshang, but Chu Tianlu was also shocked. From such a distance, even an expert of the early gold core stage like Chu Wenshang couldn't succeed in a sneak attack, let alone a peak late Foundation establishment realm expert. What was this guy thinking? Wasn't he too impulsive? Chu Xingping, you want to F***king kill me? Chu Tianliang roared in anger. Although he wished he could hack Chu Tianlu, who was behind him, into 1,000 pieces, that had to be after he escaped danger. Chu Xingping doing this, wasn't that forcing Chu Tianlu to kill him? I'm saving you. Chu Xingping also roared. His expression seemed sincere, but only he himself knew exactly what he was thinking in his heart. As he spoke, a long and narrow shadow that was faintly discernible shot out from an extremely hidden angle, noiselessly and rapidly sweeping towards Chu Tianlu's feet. The tip of the shadow shone with cold light. It was shockingly a materialized sharp blade. It was one of the Chu family's signature martial techniques, Shadow Blade. Chu Tianlu's eyelids twitched violently. Only Chu Xingping wasn't scary, but since Chu Xingping had moved, then Chu Wenshang couldn't possibly watch coldly from the sidelines. He would definitely wait for an opportunity to move. Facing the joint attack of a peak late Foundation establishment expert and an initial Aurus Core expert at the same time. Even if he held Chu Tianliang as a hostage, he still didn't have the slightest possibility of escaping unscathed. Dang! A crisp sound of metal colliding rang out. The short blade in Chu Tianlu's hand accurately blocked the other party's shadow blade. The tremendous force of impact was enough to collapse a thick wall. An opportunity. Seeing this, Chu Tianliang was overjoyed. He thought that Chu Tianlu would definitely deal a killing blow at the first moment. He didn't expect that Chu Tianlu would actually choose to block the shadow blade, and even use the blade that posed the greatest threat to him. It was simply extremely stupid. One had to know that the impact of the shadow blade was the strongest among all of the Chu family's shadow martial techniques. Even if Chu Tianlu's strength was a bit higher than Chu Xingping's, he still wasn't a Aurus Core expert. After blocking the shadow blade, he would inevitably be forced back. This was the best opportunity to escape. Chu Tianliang's eyes shone, and he gathered all his strength. He decided that as long as Chu Tianlu took half a step back, he would immediately charge forward. Once he successfully escaped, he would definitely make him die a tragic death. However, unexpectedly, after Chu Tianlu blocked the shadow blade, he didn't move in the slightest. Not only did he not take half a step back, he instead placed the short blade on Chu Tianlu's neck the moment the block ended. Chu Tianliang was so frightened that his hair stood on end, and he was indescribably shocked. How is this possible? Chu Tianliang was simply incredulous. Only when he glanced at the abnormally pitch-black shadow at his side out of the corner of his eye did he finally come to a realization. This guy actually specialized in cultivating unmoving shadow. Unmoving shadow. In the eyes of over 90% of the Chu family's disciples, this was an out-and-out useless move. It wasn't a bodily martial technique, and it didn't have any killing effect. Its only use was as the name implied. As long as the shadow didn't move, the person wouldn't move. For the absolute majority of people, this kind of move might not be used in their entire lives, so they naturally wouldn't spend the effort to specifically cultivate it. Rather than wasting time on this, It would be better to properly polish moves like the Shadow Blade and Shadow Step. Those were the ultimate moves that would produce immediate results. Looking at the entire Middle Island Chu family, the number of people who specialized in cultivating unmoving shadow probably didn't exceed 3. He never expected that Chu Tianlu would actually be one of them. Chu Tianliang immediately had a bellyful of profanities, but unfortunately, he could only forcefully hold them back. Chu Tianliang was the meat on the chopping block, and the situation was already very tense. If he took the initiative to provoke Chu Tianlu at this time, he might really lose his little life. Relying on unmoving shadow, Chu Tianlu successfully blocked the Shadow Blade. As long as he controlled Chu Tianliang, he would be in an invincible position. However, without waiting for him to feel happy, Chu Wenshang's attack had already arrived. At the same time as a vague shadow rapidly approached Chu Tianlu, it unceasingly split into countless strands. Like countless strange tentacles, they enveloped him layer by layer from all directions. It was just like a 1,000-layered cage that had risen from the ground. Chu Tianlu's heart tightened. This was a profound martial technique that only experts at or above the Golden Core stage could cultivate, Shadow Bind. He could block the Shadow Blade, but how could he block the Shadow Bind? Killing intent flashed in his eyes, and Chu Tianlu's dagger was about to pierce Chu Tianliang's throat. He knew that he couldn't escape the Shadow Bind. At this time, he could only break the jar. Unfortunately, in the end, it was still too late. Chu Wenshang was, after all, an early Golden Core stage expert. His control over shadow martial techniques was much higher than Chu Tianlu's. Even though Chu Xingping's sneak attack just now was very sudden, Chu Tianlu's response could be said to be perfect, and Chu Tianlu's follow-up attack was also somewhat hurried. However, in the end, Chu Tianlu still seized the opportunity. At the last instant before the dagger entered Chu Tianliang's throat, the dagger was forcibly covered by the shadow tentacles. No matter how much strength Chu Tianlu exerted, he couldn't pierce the dagger any deeper. Chu Tianliang escaped from death. At this time, Chu Xingping, who had just used the Shadow Blade, had already rushed over. Looking at his posture, he was prepared to take advantage of the moment when Chu Tianlu was controlled by the Shadow Bind to send him on his way. As long as he got rid of Chu Tianlu, he could get a share of 100 spirit jades. Although this price was only 1/10 of Chu Wenshang's, for a collateral descendant like Chu Xingping, it was already a huge sum of money. For this, he naturally disregarded his own safety. At this time, Chu Tianlu was already heavily bound by the Shadow Bind, unable to move. This was a ready-made head. If he didn't kill him now, then when? Chapter 54:14. Even Chu Wenshang was shocked when he saw this scene. Chu Tianlu was trapped to the point where he didn't have a chance to make a move. The owner of this dagger was actually Chu Tianliang. Chu Xingping bravely came to save Chu Tianliang without any regard for his own safety. Yet Chu Tianliang actually seized the opportunity to stab his heart. This sudden turn of events happened too suddenly, and even Chu Wenshang and Chu Tianlu were momentarily stupefied. "You're crazy." Chu Wenshang continued to trap Chu Tianlu while frowning at Chu Tianliang. He really couldn't understand the scene in front of him. Was this guy a lunatic who couldn't distinguish between friend and foe? This bastard just wanted to kill me on purpose. Did he think I couldn't see it? Chu Tianliang looked at Chu Xingping, who died on the ground, and laughed coldly. Aren't you thinking too much? Chu Wenshang didn't comment on this. Indeed, Chu Xingping acting rashly just now was debatable, but to say that he wanted to kill Chu Tianliang on purpose wasn't logical. What benefits did killing Chu Tianliang bring him? One had to know that the descendants of the ancestral family weren't just Chu Tianlu and Chu Tianliang. Unless all the descendants of the ancestral family died, Chu Xingping, a branch family descendant, would only be able to ascend to the position. Killing Chu Tianliang wouldn't bring him any substantial benefits. Instead, he would be hated and even chased by Chu Tianliang's father. Did he have nothing better to do? Moreover, even if Chu Xingping didn't choose a good opportunity to act just now, with his strength, this was the most he could do. The result proved that his gamble wasn't wrong. If it weren't for his Shadow Blade attracting Chu Tianlu's attention, Chu Wenshang wouldn't have had the chance to follow up. Not only did Chu Tianliang not feel the slightest bit of gratitude, He even killed him without hesitation. In an instant, Chu Wensheng felt a chill from the bottom of his heart. Although it was said that a man must be ruthless and mutual deception was the norm in the world of cultivation, it was really rare to see someone as ruthless as Chu Tianliang. Just because of an unreliable suspicion, he directly killed his own helper, especially under the premise that his life had just been saved by the other party. Even if Chu Wensheng had seen all kinds of schemes, he still couldn't help but feel a chill. A dignified early-stage gold core expert was actually frightened by a mere peak late-stage foundation establishment cultivator. It sounded a little ridiculous, but it was the truth. Chu Wensheng shuddered with fear at the moment. What are you waiting for? Chu Tianliang furrowed his brows. He didn't care at all about how great of an impact his blade had on others. His eyes only stared at Chu Tianlu. He had originally schemed to get rid of Chu Tianlu on this trip, and after experiencing what happened just now, he was even more happy to get rid of him. Right now, Chu Tianlu was already surrounded by layers of shadow bind. As time passed, not only would the shadow bind's power not weaken, it would instead continuously strengthen. In the beginning, it only bound his hand, but by now, his entire body was completely unable to move. Unless Chu Wensheng took the initiative to let him go, the only thing he could do was close his eyes and wait for death. You do it yourself. The spiritual knowledge fruit is mine. Chu Wensheng's tone was unquestionable. He wanted the 1,000 spirit jades that Chu Tianliang and his son had promised him, and he also wanted the spiritual knowledge fruit that he could easily obtain. Uncle Wensheng, aren't you being a bit too greedy? Chu Tianliang's brows furrowed even deeper. His first priority at the moment was undoubtedly to get rid of Chu Tianlu, but he didn't want to give up on the spiritual knowledge fruit. Although the opponent's strength was at the early gold core stage, and he definitely couldn't compete with him, it could be seen that everyone should have a share, right? What do you want? Chu Wensheng's eyes suddenly became a bit more vigilant. Chu Tianliang's performance of stabbing Chu Xingping to death with a blade just now had left a deep impression on him. In the face of benefits, this junior who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth might take a risk out of desperation. Everyone who sees it has a share, everyone divided equally, Chu Tianliang immediately proposed. Divide it equally? It's just one spiritual knowledge fruit. What's the use of splitting it in two? Chu Wensheng flatly refused. The function of a spiritual knowledge fruit was to raise one's spirit by one level. This was a matter of fact. Once it was split in two, it meant that its effect would not be enough to raise the spirit's level. At most, it would only be able to nourish the spirit, and the effect would be greatly reduced. Moreover, their understanding of the spiritual knowledge fruit was limited to hearsay. They didn't know what would happen after the spiritual knowledge fruit was split in two. What if it was directly crippled? That was not impossible. At that time, who could they find to cry to? It wasn't that Chu Tianliang didn't understand this principle, but it was rare for him to encounter the legendary spiritual knowledge fruit. He didn't want to give up just like that. He rolled his eyes and said, I can ask my father to prepare some more spiritual jades. Uncle Wensheng only needs to give me half. No, a small half will do. A spiritual knowledge fruit could easily raise the spirit level of a gold core stage expert, even a Yuanying stage old monster. Moreover, he was currently only at the peak of foundation building late stage. Maybe he would only need a small half to raise one level. Chapter 54:15. No matter how surprised Chu Wensheng was, the reality was that Chu Tianlu had indeed broken free from his shadow bind. Moreover, he had taken out the spirit knowledge fruit from his bosom and was about to stuff it into his mouth. Madman! Chu Wensheng was shocked. The spirit knowledge fruit was not poison, but the more powerful the effect of a heavenly treasure, the more thorough preparation was needed before taking it. Otherwise, it would be worse than poison. Not to mention that the entire process of taking it was a huge fatal flaw. It was not impossible for him to die on the spot. With no time to think, Chu Wensheng hurriedly used the shadow stick step again. This was the only method he could use to stop his opponent. According to common sense, the shadow stick step could not be used directly. Firstly, the conditions for shadows might not be met. Secondly, even if there were enough shadows, The traces would be too obvious. If he were to rashly send himself in front of the enemy, he might accidentally bump into the muzzle of a gun. If it were not for the fact that his strength was much higher than his opponent's, Chu Wanshang would never take such a risk. He was not a person who liked to take risks. He only reacted like this because he was determined to obtain the spirit knowledge fruit. Unexpectedly, Chu Tianlu was already prepared for this. His action of eating the spirit knowledge fruit just now was simply a pretense. Unless water had entered his brain, he would have forcefully eaten the spirit knowledge fruit under the watchful eyes of Chu Wanshang and Chu Tianliang. His action was to lure the other party to take the bait. As soon as Chu Wanshang used the shadow stick step, Chu Tianlu took the initiative to move. His target was not Chu Wanshang, but Chu Tianliang from beginning to end. He knew very well that it was impossible for him to be Chu Wanshang's opponent. In the moment he was trapped by the shadow bind, he already understood that his only chance of survival was to kill Chu Tianliang. Judging from the situation just now, Chu Wanshang and Chu Tianliang were not completely of one mind. When Chu Tianliang was really killed, after weighing the pros and cons, Chu Wanshang might not continue to target him. Only now did he react. In Lin Yi's eyes, Chu Tianlu's slow reaction had reached a certain realm. However, it was still much better than dying unaware. Besides, although Chu Tianlu's intelligence and talent were far from outstanding, there was one thing about him, and that was that he was very daring. To be more precise, it should be his ability to execute. Once he made a decision, he would press forward courageously. Just like at this moment, when he charged towards Chu Tianliang, it was as if he didn't care for his life at all. The strength in his entire body was concentrated on the tip of his blade, and he didn't hesitate to abandon his own defense. Everything he did was for the sake of killing Chu Tianliang with a single strike. It should be known that he had not completely gotten rid of Chu Wanshang at this time. He had only caught the other party off guard. Chu Wanshang was just as desperate as him. Relying on the strength of the early stage of Gold Core Realm, it was completely possible for him to catch up. Moreover, he had used the shadow sticking step head-on, taking the same risk as Chu Wanshang. Moreover, the difference in strength between him and Chu Tianliang was far from the insurmountable chasm that existed between him and Chu Wanshang. The two of them were only a minor level apart. As long as he was aware of the other party's intentions and made preparations in an instant, it was completely possible for him to counterattack and kill Chu Tianlu. Chu Tianlu was clearer than anyone about the risks involved, but he couldn't care less. In today's situation, if Chu Tianliang didn't die, then he would. There was no longer the slightest possibility for the two of them to coexist. In the blink of an eye, Chu Tianlu was only a step away from Chu Tianliang. The short blade in his hand was just about to touch his opponent's throat again, when a dark whistle suddenly came from behind him. Chu Tianlu's scalp immediately went numb. This sound was too familiar. He didn't need to turn around to know that it was definitely one of the Chu family's strongest shadow martial techniques, the shadow arrow. Chu Wanshang had been thrown off by him, and the fastest shadow sticking step, apart from various harsh conditions, also needed to accumulate power. This was a hard limit. Even a gold core expert could at most shorten this time. They couldn't completely erase it, and naturally couldn't use it continuously. However, just because Chu Wanshang couldn't catch up to him didn't mean that he could rest easy. A long-distance shadow arrow was enough to take his little life. The speed of the shadow arrow was extremely fast. Practically at the same time Chu Wanshang raised his hand, the shadow arrow had already caught up to Chu Tianlu, who was 30 meters away. If Chu Tianlu hadn't sensed it ahead of time and forcefully shifted his position by half a step, then his throat would have been directly pierced. In the end, the shadow arrow entered Chu Tianlu's right shoulder, disappearing into thin air. However, it left behind an extremely bloody and enormous wound, a ghastly sight to behold. When Chu Wanshang saw this, he furrowed his brows. Although he had been tricked by Chu Tianlu just now, relying on the shadow arrow, his trump card, he actually didn't panic in the slightest. He had always been confident that as long as he was willing, he could take Chu Tianlu's life at any time, and it would be as easy as turning over his palm. However, the scene before his eyes greatly exceeded his expectations. It wasn't strange that Chu Tianlu would be on guard against his shadow arrow, and it wasn't strange that he would shift his position by half a step in advance. However, this guy's right shoulder clearly had such a sinister bloody hole blasted open, and in the eyes of outsiders, his entire right arm seemed like it was about to fall off. At this moment, he unexpectedly didn't fall, and instead didn't move in the slightest. How was this possible? How could he withstand the powerful impact of the shadow arrow? After a moment of stupefaction, Chu Wensheng finally noticed a faint layer of texture between the opponent's limbs. At first glance, it seemed like some kind of extremely fine black line was used to form a complex and profound pattern, but upon closer inspection, he discovered that it wasn't a black line at all, but rather a shadow. Exchanging shadow for bones. Chu Wensheng was so shocked that he blurted out. As the name suggested, it was to replace the joints with a shadow for a short period of time. In this way, it was almost like half a shadow. Unless the source of the shadow could be directly eliminated, it was almost impossible to destroy it, because the shadow could not be broken. Of course, the damage from the shadow arrow just now was genuine. The only use of exchanging shadow for bones was to allow one to maintain sufficient mobility even when they were heavily injured. It didn't matter even if their joints were blasted into smithereens, unless the time limit was over. In the Chu clan's shadow system, this was definitely an unorthodox martial skill, even more so than the immovable shadow. At the very least, there were still people who cultivated a movable shadow, but exchanging shadow for bones was practically lost. According to Chu Wensheng's knowledge, even the current clan head, who had already become a nascent soul-old monster, didn't know of it. It was only recorded in the Chu clan's secret martial skill manuals. The reason for this wasn't that exchanging shadow for bones wasn't valuable enough in actual combat. On the contrary, its value in actual combat was very high, at the very least far above that of a movable shadow. The problem was that this martial skill was just too difficult to comprehend. Looking at all of the Chu clan's ancestors, the number of people who could truly comprehend its essence could be counted on one's fingers. In addition, its actual combat effectiveness was far inferior to other offensive and defensive martial skills like Shadow Arrow, so naturally no one was interested in it. Chapter 54:16. Unbeknownst to him, Chu Tianlu had put so much effort into immovable shadow in order to cultivate changed shadow. Although these two martial skills didn't share the same origin, they were essentially similar in essence. If not for this, he wouldn't have been able to cultivate changed shadow. After all, he had never been a super genius like Ling Tianyu. This Chu Tianlu has quite a character. In the distance, Linny grinned as he watched this scene. It wasn't that his character was unique, but that his fighting style was very unique. After a few moments of observation, Lin Yi had a rough idea of the Chu family's shadow-type techniques. With his level of understanding, he was able to get it right. From his point of view, the shadow-type techniques were best used for assassination, and other than that, they were used for harassment and restraint. As for fighting head-on, that wasn't its forte at all. But when it came to Chu Tianlu, the Chu family's inherited shadow martial skills were forcibly turned into a hot-blooded head-on confrontation. Moreover, it was a tyrannical style of fighting to the end, even at the cost of serious injuries. One really didn't know what to say. One couldn't say whether this kind of strange style was good or bad, but at least from the current situation, it had indeed achieved unexpected results. Chu Tianlu not only withstood the impact of the shadow arrow, but even his right shoulder, which already had a sinister bloody hole and should have been on the verge of collapse, was still as steady as a mountain. His right hand was still firmly holding the dagger, the tip of the dagger pointed straight at Chu Tianliang's throat. Chu Wensheng could only sigh helplessly at this scene. At this distance, he had already used the shadow arrow. What else could he do? Chu Tianliang could only rely on himself for the rest. Although he was relying on Chain Shadow to forcibly maintain his offensive, the shadow arrow was still the Chu family's most powerful move. It was impossible for it to be completely unaffected. In fact, at this moment, Chu Tianlu's full offensive had already been weakened by at least 40%. Added to the fact that Chu Tianliang had already made preparations in advance, and that the disparity in strength between them wasn't too great, it was really difficult to say who had the upper hand. Even if he took 10,000 steps back, Even if Chu Tianliang couldn't take advantage of this opportunity to kill Chu Tianlu, self-preservation was not an issue. The result once again exceeded Chu Wanshang's expectations. At such a crucial moment, Chu Tianliang unexpectedly didn't move at all. He was actually stupefied. As he watched the tip of Chu Tianlu's blade get closer and closer, Chu Wanshang's heart burned with impatience. If Chu Tianliang really died here, he wouldn't have the slightest leeway left. He hurriedly roared, "Run!" Only now did Chu Tianliang suddenly wake up. The abilities displayed by this urn left even Lin Yi somewhat flabbergasted. If it wasn't a single-use item, and if it could switch two people's positions at will, to a certain extent, this toy was simply a divine artifact. In terms of overall level, the small ancient Jianghu was naturally far inferior to the Heavenly Island, but it still had many unique aspects, such as divine sense and weapons. On the Heavenly Island, from the profound ascension stage to the foundation establishment stage, although there were many people who used weapons, and there was no lack of sects like the Thousand Blades sect that specialized in cultivating weapons for a living, if one really carefully counted, the proportion of people who used weapons was not high. In particular, those who wholeheartedly devoted themselves to weapons were even rarer. It wasn't that people didn't like to use weapons, but the main reason was that there really weren't many blacksmiths on the Heavenly Island. If one didn't have enough opportunities, it would be very difficult to buy a suitable weapon on the market. Moreover, if one wanted to truly use a powerful weapon, one had to have a powerful divine sense, or else they wouldn't be able to control it. On the Heavenly Island, people generally didn't train their divine sense much, at least not before the profound ascension stage. In this aspect, they naturally weren't so passionate about it. The small ancient Jianghu was different. Almost all the practitioners here started to systematically train their divine sense from the foundation establishment stage. Because of this, weapons were far more common here than on the Heavenly Island. Not only was the Thousand Blades sect an exception, almost all the disciples of the sects carried weapons with them. The only difference was the strength of the weapon. Otherwise, he would not be bleeding so profusely. However, the strength of an early golden core cultivator was not just for show. This kind of heavy injury, which would have definitely killed an ordinary person, was actually forcefully stabilized by him. Although his appearance was terrifying, he would not die for a while. When Chu Tianlu heard this name, he immediately understood. Chu Hongding was none other than Chu Tianliang's father, a top-level figure who controlled the entire Chu clan's finances. Only two people in the entire Chu clan had the opportunity to enter the lowest basement. One was the current clan leader, a newly advanced nascent soul cultivator, and the other was him, Chu Hongding. Why did Chu Tianliang have the shadow-shifting jar? Even an idiot could tell that Chu Hongding was willing to pay a heavy price for this son of his. Uncle Wenshang, you saw it too. I was forced to save my life just now. This guy is already at the end of his tether. Why don't you quickly finish him off? Don't worry, the 1,000 spirit jades that my father promised you definitely won't be any less. Also, I don't want the spirit knowledge fruit anymore. It's all yours. Chu Tianliang calmed down slightly and hurriedly tried to salvage the situation. Just now, Chu Wanshang had almost been completely screwed over, especially with the precedent of biting the hand that fed him and stabbing Chu Xingping to death. If he didn't quickly salvage the situation, Chu Wanshang might turn around and attack him instead. That would be the end of him. Chu Tianlu's heart jumped when he heard this. The effects of shadow-shifting bones were about to disappear. At that time, his right arm, which he was used to using, would become a complete burden. He wouldn't be able to fight back at all. If Chu Wanshang continued to forcefully attack him, he would have nowhere to run. It had to be said that even though Chu Tianliang's performance in other areas wasn't worth mentioning, his words came at the right time. Sure enough, the expression of Chu Wanshang, who had already flown into a rage out of humiliation, changed. The spirit knowledge fruit and 1,000 spirit jades. There was no way he could resist such a temptation. As for the debt of being forced into a bloody mess by Chu Tianliang's shadow-shifting technique, that could wait for another day. Uncle Wenshang, you've already personally experienced this guy's character. Do you still want to continue abusing him? Even if you really help him kill me, there's a high chance that he'll turn around and bite you in the end. I advise you to think carefully before speaking. Chu Tianlu could only open his mouth to persuade him. In his current state, there was absolutely no chance of victory. He could only attack Chu Wenshang's mind. Chu Wenshang was somewhat hesitant. Seeing this, Chu Tianliang, who was 100 feet away, hurriedly shouted, "Don't listen to his nonsense, listen to me. As long as you kill him, the divine knowledge fruit and the 1,000 spirit jades will all be yours. Uncle Wenshang, you should at least look at the other party's character before making a deal. Otherwise, if they turn hostile and refuse to acknowledge their debt, you'll be the one to suffer. Also, don't forget that you personally experienced his shadow-shifting jar." Chu Tianlu continued to persuade him. Chu Wenshang didn't feel anything before, but when he heard the last sentence, his heart suddenly thumped. It had to be known that Chu Tianliang's possession of the shadow-shifting jar was a serious crime equivalent to rebellion. Since he had personally witnessed it, Chu Hongding and Chu Tianliang would definitely think of a way to silence him afterwards. There was no other choice. At that time, even if he really obtained the spirit knowledge fruit and 1,000 spirit jades, it would only serve to hasten his death. When he saw Chu Wenshang's expression change, Chu Tianliang turned around and fled without another word. Chu Wenshang's guess was correct. Since he had been forced to use the shadow-shifting jar, all the witnesses present had to be silenced. Chu Tianlu had to die, and Chu Wenshang had to die as well. There was no way he could argue against this, so he could only flee. Chu Tianliang fled very quickly. Chu Wenshang and Chu Tianlu could only watch him in the dust. Normally, any one of them would be able to easily catch up to Chu Tianliang, but now that they were both heavily injured, how could they chase after him? All right, now we've both become thorns in the eyes of this father and son. Chu Wenshang laughed bitterly. Offending Chu Hongding, a person with real authority at the top of the Chu clan, would not be easy in the future. Chapter 54:18. Chu Wenshang glanced at him and smiled bitterly. "You're really too honest. As long as we're not caught by the patriarch, people like Chu Hongding won't be able to take us down. I'm willing to bet that by the time we return to the Middle Island, we'll already be hated by everyone. They'll definitely pin the crime of stealing the shadow-shifting urn on us. Chu Hongding might even send a law enforcement squad to kill us openly. Do you believe me?" This, Chu Tianlu couldn't help but choke. He hadn't thought of this, but with Chu Hongding and Chu Tianliang's despicable nature, it was only natural for them to distort the truth. At that time, not only would they be unable to accuse them, even protecting themselves would be a huge problem. Fortunately, the shadow-shifting urn is locked in the lowest basement. Normally, apart from the patriarch, only Chu Hongding can obtain it. No matter how they distort the truth, it's still an unavoidable loophole. Moreover, he's been in charge of the family's finances for all these years, and he's been playing all sorts of tricks in private. The patriarch has more or less sensed it, but he's turned a blind eye to it for the sake of his father-son relationship. Tianlu, you're the patriarch's direct grandson, so you're not inferior to them by blood. We might be able to retaliate, Chu Wenshang analyzed. Yes, that's all we can do. Chu Tianlu nodded and suddenly took out the divine knowledge fruit. Looking at Chu Wenshang, he asked, "What should we do with this?" The two of them had turned from enemies into friends. No matter who died, the other would have a hard time in the future. Only by sticking together could they fight for a chance. It was a bit irrational to monopolize the divine knowledge fruit at a time like this. Although Chu Tianlu wasn't very smart, he could still see the big picture. Chu Wenshang looked at the divine knowledge fruit and licked his lips. He was very tempted, and even subconsciously had the urge to kill and steal the treasure. However, his rationality prevailed in the end, and he stared at each other. Chu Wenshang wanted this divine knowledge fruit even in his dreams, but it was also very important to Chu Tianlu. He was now at the great perfection of the foundation establishment realm. Once he ate the divine knowledge fruit, it was very likely that he would naturally break through the barrier and advance to the golden core realm. It was not suitable for anyone to monopolize it, but if they divided it equally, the value of this divine knowledge fruit would be greatly reduced, and no one would be able to achieve their wish. What should they do? The two of them simultaneously sunk into silence. A moment later, Chu Tianlu suddenly said, "Why don't we leave first and think of a suitable method? This place is extremely dangerous. We can't stay here for long." Extremely dangerous? Chu Wenshang was stunned when he heard this. There was no one around, and there were no signs of spirit beasts. It was reasonable to say that it was not safe to stay here for long. After all, the tide was going to rise soon. But to say that it was very dangerous, where did that come from? Okay, let's talk while we walk. Chu Tianlu carefully looked at his surroundings. He took the lead and walked at the front. At the same time, he said, "This place is haunted." Huh. Chu Wenshang followed behind him, his eyes filled with suspicion. This little brat wouldn't deliberately make up lies to deceive him in order to keep the spiritual knowledge fruit for himself, right? I'm not trying to scare you. Uncle Wenshang, think about it carefully. Why would I take the initiative to jump into the sea? Why would I know that the divine knowledge fruit is there? Don't you find it very strange? Chu Tianlu laughed bitterly. It's indeed very strange. Chu Wenshang nodded and said suspiciously, "You mean that someone is playing tricks behind the scenes?" "It's not that someone is playing tricks, but that there really is a ghost." Earlier, a voice suddenly appeared in my head, and I couldn't help but jump into the sea. Just now, I found the divine knowledge fruit because of this voice. I don't know where it came from, and I don't know what it wants to do, but my intuition tells me that it's best to leave first. As Chu Tianlu spoke, he quickened his pace. "Is that so? So you humans all bite the hand that feeds you, don't you?" It was clearly still Chu Wenshang's voice behind him, but the tone of his voice terrified Chu Tianlu. He subconsciously stopped, and a layer of goosebumps appeared on his body. "Uncle Wenshang, you?" Chu Tianlu hurriedly turned his head. Chu Wenshang was still Chu Wenshang, but this tone were clearly the same as the voice that had appeared in his head before. Chu Wenshang similarly stopped. A strange smile hung on his face, causing one to tremble with fear. He said sinisterly, "Human brat, I'm the ghost you spoke of. Are you afraid?" Chu Tianlu jumped in fright. He hurriedly took a few steps back, pointed at the other party, and stammered, You, who exactly are you? Every wrong has its perpetrator. Every debt has its debtor. I've never provoked you." "You haven't provoked me, but I'm rather hungry now, so I plan to eat you. What do you think of this reason?" Chu Wenshang was still laughing strangely. "Who the hell are you? What did you do to Uncle Wenshang?" If it was a normal person, they would probably have been scared out of their wits. Although Chu Tianlu was also very panicked, he still maintained a certain level of rationality and calmness. "Nothing much. I'm just temporarily borrowing his body. Of course, he's already a dead man, because his primordial spirit has already been eaten by me. The early gold core stage is a bit weak, and the taste isn't that great, but it's better than nothing." Chu Wenshang laughed strangely. After hearing this, Chu Tianlu immediately felt as if he had fallen into an ice house. The early gold core stage Chu Wenshang had died just like that? What do you want? Chu Tianlu retreated again. In his fright, he even threw the acute pain in his right shoulder to the back of his mind. Although he already had a bad feeling from the moment he jumped off the cliff and was always on tenterhooks, when he truly faced this strange and indescribable existence, he still felt a wave of fear. His back was already drenched in cold sweat. "Your question is very strange. Since I spent so much effort to lure you down, of course it's to eat you. Could it be that I invited you here as a guest?" Chu Wenshang, whose body was already occupied by the monster, spoke with a strange expression. "Eat us." Chu Tianlu's heart jumped again. The so-called eat was obviously to swallow the primordial spirit. Although it wouldn't do any harm to the body, once the primordial spirit died, it would really die. Chu Tianlu was stunned. Seeing that the other party still didn't have any intention of directly attacking him, he inwardly thought that he definitely wouldn't be able to escape today. Thus, he gathered his courage and asked again, "Why me?" This question was asked without rhyme or reason. If it weren't for the fact that this Chu Wenshang, whose body was occupied, had done this kind of thing many times before and was long accustomed to these people's reactions, he probably wouldn't have been able to react in time. The primitive Jianghu mainly cultivated the divine sense. In terms of the physical body, it was obviously weaker than the experts of the same level in the Heaven Stage Island. In terms of the explosive power of the physical body, even the experts of the early stage of the Gold Core realm in the Heaven Stage Island could not reach this level, let alone Chu Wanshang, whose primordial spirit had been swallowed. Without a doubt, this was all thanks to the monster that had taken over his physical body. Using 10% of his physical body to use 15% of its strength was enough to show that the monster itself was not to be underestimated. Of course, this method of using it would definitely take a great toll on Chu Wanshang's physical body. He would probably collapse on the spot after using it a few times. Pa. The divine knowledge fruit reached the side of Chu Tianlu's mouth, but in the end, he was still unable to take a bite. It was forcibly snatched away by Chu Wanshang. You're about to die, yet you still can't let it go. I spent so much effort to lure you here to dig up the divine knowledge fruit. Did you really think that I was just using you to fish for a primordial spirit? You don't know what's good for you. It just so happens that I haven't tried the 1,000 ants technique for a long time. Then, I'll use you as a review and let you taste what it truly means to be in utter misery. Chu Wanshang's face revealed a sinister expression. Before he finished speaking, Chu Tianlu's neck was already gripped by Chu Wanshang's hand, and he was suspended in midair. Chu Tianlu's face instantly swelled like a pig's liver. No matter how he struggled with all his might, it was of no use. The disparity in strength between them was too great. Even in front of Chu Wanshang himself, it was difficult for Chu Tianlu to retaliate, let alone in front of this unfathomable freak. Moreover, his body was still heavily injured. Although Chu Wanshang's neck had also been sliced open, his opponent was only temporarily borrowing his body. He simply didn't take this trivial matter to heart. If this continued, Chu Tianlu would very quickly suffocate. However, if that was all, he could still be considered lucky. While Chu Tianlu felt suffocated, his primordial spirit seemed to have been plucked out of his body out of thin air. Countless ants were clinging to it and gnawing at it. First, it was extremely itchy, then it was extremely painful, and then it was extremely itchy again. This cycle repeated endlessly and continuously. In the blink of an eye, his entire body was about to be tormented to the point of collapse. You want to die so soon? How could it be that easy? Human brat, don't worry. When you're about to die, I'll go easy on you and save you. It's rare for me to use the 1,000 ants technique. If I don't torture you for a year or so, wouldn't it be too boring? I forgot to tell you, among the humans I tortured with the 1,000 ants technique in the past, the one with the most tenacity lasted for more than 7 months. He died and came back to life again and again, and only when his primordial spirit collapsed did I stop. I wonder how long you can last? At this moment, Chu Wanshang seemed to have been possessed by a demon. His face was still the same, but no matter whether it was his expression or his gaze, they clearly didn't belong to the category of a human. Chu Tianlu was so tortured that he couldn't speak at all. He could only roll his eyes desperately. Today, he had truly experienced the feeling of being in a state where he could neither live nor die. Chu Wanshang continued to torture him as he looked at the divine knowledge fruit in his other hand. He licked his lips and sneered. Let me tell you something. This is the 35th divine knowledge fruit that I've obtained. Are you very surprised? Hee, you humans are all here for the divine knowledge fruit, but you don't know that this kind of treasure isn't something you can touch. My hope of rebirth is all on this fruit, and you want to compete with me? The 35th? Where are the other 34? A voice suddenly sounded above his head. At the same time, it carried with it an overwhelming, bone-chilling coldness. Chu Wanshang, who had a mocking expression on his face, was instantly shocked. At this moment, Chu Tianlu's mind was completely blank from the torture of the 1,000 ants technique. Of course, he wasn't the one who said this. Instead, it was another young man who had suddenly appeared in the sky. It was none other than Bing Wuqing, who had parted ways with Linny earlier. Although this underground cave wasn't small, it wasn't very big either. Linny stayed here and watched the show with great interest. This was enough time for Bing Wuqing to circle around the cave. In the end, she saw the divine knowledge fruit in Chu Wanshang's hand. Coincidentally, This guy said that this was his 35th divine knowledge fruit. With Bing Wuqing's personality, of course she would make her move immediately. As for the cause and effect, why would she care so much? Chapter 54:20. Chu Wenshang immediately felt immense pressure. A golden core expert was nothing. In his eyes, they were nothing more than food delivered to his doorstep. However, Bing Wuqing was a genuine expert at the peak of the early nascent soul stage, and her strength was enough to look down on others of the same level. No matter where she appeared in the immemorial Jianghu, she was an existence that absolutely could not be underestimated. For ice spears shot down from above. If it had been the Chu Wenshang from before, he would have died without a doubt, even if he had 100 lives. An early-stage gold core against a peak early-stage nascent soul, especially when it was a super genius like Bing Wuqing. Such a huge disparity was enough to crush everything. In the end, the 4 ice spears all missed. After all, Chu Wenshang was not the real Chu Wenshang. How could an existence that could casually swallow the primordial spirit of a golden core cultivator be ordinary? Bing Wuqing's eyes were a little surprised. She had just arrived and did not know what had just happened, nor did she know the background of her opponent. She had simply judged that her opponent was not simple, but she did not expect him to be so extraordinary. Not only did he avoid the 4 life-threatening ice spears, but he even turned from defense to offense, taking the opportunity to stick close to her. Shadow sticking step? After all, Bing Wuqing was from the Middle Island sect. She immediately recognized the move that her opponent had used. It was the Chu family's shadow sticking step. When did the Chu family have such an expert? He could use the shadow sticking step so skillfully. Could he be a new nascent soul old monster of the Chu family? Bing Wuqing was only astonished. At this moment, Chu Tianlu, who was unexpectedly saved because of her intervention, was incredibly shocked at the scene before him. This guy had merely taken over Chu Wenshang's physical body. How could he use the shadow step? Could he use Chu Wenshang's martial arts technique after swallowing the primordial spirit? Most importantly, how could the shadow sticking step be used like this? As a Chu family disciple who had practiced the shadow sticking step, Chu Tianlu's understanding of it was unquestionable. Such a shadow body technique was certainly unique in terms of effect, but it was not a first-class move. After all, there were too many restrictions. Even if the conditions for the shadow were met, there was still a certain time to accumulate power. It was difficult to guarantee the effect in actual combat. However, Chu Wenshang's move just now had completely subverted his understanding. The shadow did not meet the requirements, and it did not show any signs of accumulating power. At the critical moment, it directly stuck to him like a ghost. Was this still the shadow sticking step? Comparisons were odious, and comparisons were odious. They were both the Chu clan's shadow-adhering steps, and they were both Chu Wenshang's physical bodies. However, when Chu Tianlu used it, it was so shocking. For a moment, Chu Tianlu was dumbfounded. He watched helplessly as Bing Wuqing and Chu Wenshang exchanged blows right in front of him, but he didn't take the initiative to retreat. He actually comprehended it. In the distance, Linny couldn't help but laugh when he saw this scene. Chu Tianlu had narrowly escaped death, and had actually entered the state of enlightenment that countless cultivators yearned for even in their dreams at this time and place. Could this be considered a foolish person having a foolish fortune? Linny was about to make a move, but now that Bing Wuqing had intervened, there was no need for him to show himself in a hurry. He might as well wait and see first. At this time, Bing Wuqing and Chu Wenshang were almost stuck together. This distance was too dangerous, and the slightest carelessness could lead to death. Even Bing Wuqing didn't dare to be careless. The moment her opponent got close to her, she did not hesitate to raise her ruthless ice stance to the extreme. With her current strength, the ruthless ice stance was no small matter, especially since this move was more powerful the closer the distance was. Chu Wenshang taking the initiative to stick close to her was practically sending himself to his death. Bing Wuqing was very certain that at such a close distance, she could instantly kill an expert at the peak of the early stage of the nascent soul realm. Even an expert at the middle stage of the nascent soul realm, who was a level higher, would be severely injured, and it was not impossible for someone with a weaker foundation to die on the spot. The result was just as she had expected. Chu Wenshang was frozen without any suspense, and his entire body instantly turned into a lifelike human-shaped ice sculpture. Bing Wuqing was instantly relieved. Being frozen to this extent, his physical functions must have completely collapsed, and he was already a dead man. However, at this moment, an earth-shattering roar of a tyrannical beast exploded in her ears, and a huge silhouette that was tangible but intangible emerged from Chu Wenshang's body. When she got a clear look at the other party's appearance, Bing Wuqing was stunned, and she almost blurted out, "A crocodile?" Not only Bing Wuqing, but even Lin Yi was a little surprised when he saw it. He had been trying to guess what kind of existence the other party was, and it was only now that the truth was revealed. It was actually a huge and ferocious man-eating crocodile. This was Tai Snake Island, and the consciousness fruit was transformed from the snake gallbladder of the Tai Snake clan. Lin Yi had initially thought that this was a Tai snake, but he did not expect it to be a completely unrelated man-eating crocodile, and a primordial spirit at that. To be able to force me to this extent, you do have some skills, human. Humph, but this is as far as you can go. The voice of the man-eating crocodile was clearly imprinted in Bing Wuqing's mind, and what followed was endless itching and pain, as if millions of ants were crawling on her body. It was the 1,000 ants technique that she had just used on Chu Tianlu. Just now, Chu Tianlu had only held on for a moment before he was on the verge of collapsing. The torturous power of the 1,000 ants technique was evident, but the effect was not as obvious when it was used on Bing Wuqing. She did not even make a sound, but her expressionless face looked a little more ferocious. Not only that, but Bing Wuqing was actually thinking of counterattacking at this time. While her primordial spirit could be immune to most martial arts techniques, her merciless ice force could still be put to use, although it was not as immediate as it was with her alchemic fire. You're pretty stubborn, aren't you? You still want to fight back? It's a pity that you're too weak. I'm the mighty sky-devouring crocodile. Back when I still had my physical body, I was invincible in the small, immemorial martial world. You top-notch human cultivators were nothing more than a pile of food in my eyes. Although I'm in dire straits now, it's still more than enough to deal with a peakerly nascent soul like you. The man-eating crocodile avoided the range of the merciless ice force while looking down at Bing Wuqing from above. Sky-devouring crocodile. The ferocious expression on Bing Wuqing's face was once again filled with shock. This immemorial man-eating crocodile was actually the sky-devouring crocodile that had wreaked havoc hundreds of years ago. It was one of the few super-ferocious beasts in the history of the small, immemorial martial world. Back then, when it had stirred up trouble, it had forced the entire immemorial alliance into a state of panic. Countless cultivators had been swallowed into its belly, and the immemorial alliance had even specially organized a dozen nascent soul-old monsters to join forces to hunt it down. Chapter 54:21. According to historical records, this ferocious beast wasn't destroyed by humans in the end. Instead, for some unknown reason, it went into hiding on its own. No one expected it to appear in a secret cave on Tai Snake Island and even become a primordial spirit. Are you scared? The sky-devouring giant crocodile floated calmly in the air, completely avoiding the merciless ice force's range. Meanwhile, the 1,000 ants technique continued to torment Bing Wuqing, making her invincible. Bing Wuqing's expression was ugly, not only because of the 1,000 ants technique, but also because she was really scared by her opponent. According to historical records, the sky-devouring giant crocodile was an existence that stood at the top of the small, immemorial underworld. Ordinary nascent soul-old monsters were like a fart before it, and even nascent soul-perfected cultivators might not be able to escape unscathed from it, let alone herself, who was only at the peak of the early nascent soul realm. The only good news was that her opponent wasn't at his peak, and was only a primordial spirit. Bing Wuqing didn't have any other effective means to deal with a primordial spirit other than the merciless ice force. However, since her opponent had become a primordial spirit, her strength would naturally be greatly reduced. Otherwise, if it were the sky-devouring giant crocodile at its peak, Bing Wuqing would have long fled. To be honest, Even though she knew that her opponent was only a primordial spirit, Bing Wuching was already thinking of retreating. She had no other choice. Firstly, she couldn't beat him, and secondly, she couldn't do anything to him other than the merciless ice force. What else could she do but run? However, in her current state, she had to at least suppress the Thousand Ants technique before she could escape. Otherwise, she couldn't afford to be distracted. Moreover, although he looked fine on the surface, he was only holding on with his inhuman willpower. As time went on, even a deity would collapse. But how could she dispel the Thousand Ants technique? I'd like to ask, why would the sky-devouring giant crocodile, whose name was feared by everyone back then, appear in an obscure and remote place like Tai Snake Island? Bing Wuching suddenly retracted her merciless ice force and changed the subject. She wasn't the only one who wanted to know the answer to this question. All the cultivators of the small immemorial underworld probably wanted to know the answer as well. If the sky-devouring giant crocodile had continued to wreak havoc, the history of the entire small immemorial underworld might have been rewritten. Even the existence of the immemorial alliance today might have been a big question. You, human, are really an anomaly. The sky-devouring giant crocodile's illusory crocodile face revealed a very strange expression for the first time. The number of nascent soul realm-old monsters who had died in its giant mouth could not even be counted with 2 hands and 2 hands. Bing Wuching was indeed the first person it had ever seen who could remain unfazed after being struck by its Thousand Ants technique. She could even answer its questions calmly and calmly. Seeing that Bing Wuching was trying to stall for time, the sky-devouring giant crocodile was happy to cooperate. He said, "Fine. No one can dispel my Thousand Ants technique anyway. You'll be tortured to death sooner or later. Since you want to stall for time, I'll do it with you." Hearing that, Linny stopped what he was doing. When he saw that Bing Wuching was in trouble, he was actually about to intervene. But since Bing Wuching could endure it, he was interested to hear about the sky-devouring giant crocodile's past. This Tai Snake Island was formed by the Tai Snake ancestor from thousands of years ago. I accidentally discovered this place a few hundred years ago, but I didn't expect to meet its descendants. It just so happened that the Tai Snake clan had laid eggs not long ago, so I swallowed all of its eggs without hesitation. In the end, it fought me with its life. At that time, I thought that the Tai Snake clan was powerful, but it wasn't the Tai Snake ancestor. How dare it fight me, the sky-devouring giant crocodile? It's a pity that I didn't realize that it was a mutant, and it swallowed me whole. The sky-devouring giant crocodile sighed as it talked about this. What happened in the end? Bing Wuching asked calmly. In the end, it stuffed itself to death. But I didn't fare much better either. It melted my physical body, and I became what I am now. Not only that, but even the snake eggs I swallowed became my death talismans. Each one of them is stubbornly stuck in my primordial spirit, and I can only use the spirit knowledge fruit to melt them. The sky-devouring giant crocodile explained everything in detail. As it spoke, the sky-devouring giant crocodile kept sizing up Bing Wuching. Its pair of terrifying eyes were glowing brightly. Although Bing Wuching wasn't weak, she couldn't do anything in front of the sky-devouring giant crocodile. From the beginning to the end, the sky-devouring giant crocodile was in an invincible position. Otherwise, it wouldn't have bothered wasting its breath on her. That's right, the sky-devouring giant crocodile was using the sky-devouring giant crocodile to stall for time. It had absolute confidence in its Thousand Ants technique, so as long as it continued to stall for time, Bing Wuching would sooner or later be tortured to death, and it wouldn't need to waste its energy on her again. But now, the sky-devouring giant crocodile had a new idea. It wanted to possess her. After devouring Chu Wanshang's primordial spirit, it seized the opportunity to possess Chu Wanshang's body. This was actually a form of possession, but it didn't take it too seriously, nor did it really control every inch of Chu Wanshang's body. It could barely be considered an incomplete form of possession. After all, it was just the body of a beginner golden elixir realm expert. In its eyes, it was no different from trash. But Bing Wuching was different. It wasn't that easy to encounter a peak early nascent soul realm expert on Taishi Island. Moreover, it had already discovered from the first encounter that this person was extremely talented. If it could properly possess her body, even if it couldn't unleash its original strength at its peak, it could at least produce 30 to 40% of it. That would be enough to make it invincible in this tiny, immemorial Jianghu. How could the sky-devouring giant crocodile not be tempted at all with such an unpolished piece of jade in front of it? Of course, even if they were both forms of possession of a beginner golden elixir realm expert and possession of a peak early nascent soul realm expert, were two completely different things. If it wanted to completely possess and replace Bing Wuqing, even the sky-devouring giant crocodile would need to show enough patience. Is the Tai Shi egg a death warrant? There was no change in Bing Wuqing's expression, but a fine layer of sweat had formed on her forehead. The thousand ants technique was no small matter. No matter how hard she tried to suppress it, it was gradually showing signs of collapsing. Chapter 54:22. Although she was trying to buy time, Bing Wuqing was still surprised and could not help but ask, what does this have to do with the consciousness fruit? The tumors come from the Tai snake eggs, and the consciousness fruit also comes from the Tai snake eggs. I tried for hundreds of years before discovering that the consciousness fruit can remove these tumors. Unfortunately, the consciousness fruit is really rare, and if I'm unlucky, I won't be able to produce one in decades. I've been here for so many years, and this is only the 35th. The sky-devouring giant crocodile cried bitterly. If it had known this earlier, it would not have come to such a lousy place. Otherwise, it might have become the master of a small immemorial Jianghu by now. How would it end up like this? When it said this, both Bing Wuqing and Lin Yi in the distance could not help but feel a little disappointed. A total of 35 consciousness fruits. When they heard this number just now, they were overwhelmed with emotions. One consciousness fruit could upgrade one's primordial soul level. If they could get all 35, how many levels would they be able to upgrade? Even if eating too much of this thing would cause resistance, with the quantity, it would be no problem to upgrade 10 or 8 levels. Not to mention Bing Wuqing. Even Lin Yi's heart trembled when he thought about this. The reason why his strength could improve by leaps and bounds in the past few years on Heaven Stage Island was not only because of various opportunities, but also because of various top-grade elixirs. But now that he was in the profound ascension stage, the elixirs were no longer effective. If he wanted to upgrade, he could only rely on hard work. If he continued to develop normally, it would take at least a few years, decades, or even hundreds of years. But now, a consciousness fruit suddenly appeared. What if it was also effective for profound ascension stage experts? Wouldn't it be worth it? Lin Yi's heart was burning, but now he was doused with a bucket of cold water. Since it was used to remove tumors, the previous 34 must have been used by the sky-devouring giant crocodile. In other words, there was only one consciousness fruit in front of him. I'm thinking too much. After understanding this, Lin Yi could not help but blush. He had been in a good state of mind before, but perhaps because he had projected his primordial soul for too long, he had been restless recently and even worried about gains and losses. This was not a good sign. So there's only one. What a pity. Bing Wuqing also sighed. Everyone coveted the God knowledge fruit, and she was no exception. However, she was also very clear about her own position and situation. An absolutely rational person like her would not be blinded by greed and keep the God knowledge fruit to herself. The first thing she did after she got it was to present it to Lin Yi. If she could find a few more God knowledge fruits, Bing Wuqing believed that she would definitely be able to get a share of the loot, based on Lin Yi's usual open-minded character. However, there was only one God knowledge fruit, so there was nothing to be excited about. Heh, judging from your tone, you're still eyeing the spiritual knowledge fruit? The sky-devouring giant crocodile was amused when it heard that. These humans were really interesting. They were obviously about to die, but they still hadn't changed. But then again, the spirit knowledge fruit was really in Bing Wuqing's hands now. However, even a fool could tell that the sky-devouring giant crocodile was determined to have Bing Wuqing. The spirit knowledge fruit would eventually belong to it, but it was in its primordial spirit state now, so it couldn't even pick it up. It could only return it to its rightful owner after it had possessed Bing Wuqing. Can I? Bing Wuqing's struggling expression suddenly turned a little strange. Then, the temperature within a radius of several miles plummeted, and the merciless ice force poured out again. This time, it wasn't the sky-devouring giant crocodile that was hit, but Bing Wuqing herself. In the blink of an eye, Bing Wuqing was frozen into a human-shaped ice sculpture, just like Chu Wenshang. Is this fellow crazy? The sky-devouring giant crocodile couldn't react in time. Even though Bing Wuqing's resistance to her own martial arts techniques was much stronger than the average person's, she was still harming herself by doing this. Not only would her body suffer frostbite, but even her primordial spirit would be severely injured. Primordial spirit. The sky-devouring giant crocodile wasn't stupid. When it thought of this, it immediately understood Bing Wuqing's plan. She didn't hesitate to harm herself because she wanted to use this move to neutralize the Thousand Ants technique. The merciless ice force was effective against primordial spirits, so it might be effective against the Thousand Ants technique as well. This way, even though he would be injured on top of his own injuries, once the Thousand Ants technique was neutralized, he would no longer have the shackles around his neck. With his abilities, even if he couldn't defeat the sky-devouring giant crocodile, he still had a chance of escaping. The sky-devouring giant crocodile was still thinking of possession. How could it let him succeed so easily? When it finally reacted, it didn't waste a single word. Forcefully withstanding the power of the merciless ice force, its primordial spirit transformed into its original form. It looked down from above and bit down on Bing Wuqing's head. According to its original plan, it wanted to use the Thousand Ants technique to torture Bing Wuqing's primordial spirit until it collapsed. That way, it would be able to take over her body effortlessly. However, its plans couldn't keep up with the changes now, so it couldn't care less. It had to swallow this fellow's primordial spirit clean first. It would be a great tonic for it. A hint of anxiety flashed across Bing Wuqing's eyes. Her decisiveness in cutting off her own arm had indeed paid off. While her primordial spirit had been severely injured, the Thousand Ants technique had been neutralized. However, her body was still frozen, and she would need at least a breath's time to recover her mobility. This was a gamble. Not only did she have to bet on the merciless ice force neutralizing the Thousand Ants technique, but she also had to bet that her opponent wouldn't make any big moves within a breath's time. Bing Wuqing had won the first half of her gamble, but she hadn't won the second half. Since he couldn't move his body, he was now a live target. All he could do was watch helplessly as he walked into the tiger's mouth. Right at this moment, a beam of fire shot out from afar and hit the sky-devouring giant crocodile squarely in the middle of its bloody mouth. The sky-devouring giant crocodile didn't think much of it at first, but the moment the beam of fire entered its mouth, it howled miserably and retreated frantically in shock and fear. Who's that? The sky-devouring giant crocodile was instantly frightened. Although the merciless ice force was effective against primordial spirits, it could only be regarded as a side effect at best. It would already be impressive if it could exert 30% of its effect. However, this beam of fire was different. It was a natural enemy of primordial spirits, and its effect was more than 10 times stronger. I've been watching the show for so long. Don't tell me that the famous sky-devouring giant crocodile didn't notice anything at all? A figure slowly approached from afar. Bing Wuqing was overjoyed when she heard the voice. Needless to say, the person who had come was none other than Lin Yi. Who are you? Watching as Lin Yi drew closer, the sky-devouring giant crocodile rose into the air once again in fear. It didn't dare to continue attacking Bing Wuqing. Although the beam of fire from before couldn't be considered a serious injury, it was enough to cause it great pain. Instead, it was aimed at his feet. Sizzle. There was an ear-numbing sizzling sound as a puddle of black liquid appeared beneath Lin Yi's feet. Upon closer inspection, there seemed to be countless corpses of strange insects hidden within. However, they were quickly incinerated by the pill fire, leaving not a single residue behind. Is this your Thousand Ants technique? Lin Yi grinned. This sky-devouring giant crocodile looked like an unparalleled ferocious beast. Anyone who saw its appearance would feel that it was ferocious and invincible. However, no one would have expected it to be so cunning. If it weren't for the fact that Linny had been on guard, anyone else would not have been able to dodge its dirty tricks. After missing its attack, the sky-devouring giant crocodile became even more frightened. It quickly stopped its feint and turned to flee. After all, it was an old freak that had lived for countless years. Even though it couldn't tell the exact level of Lin Yi's abilities, it could tell from their first encounter that he was not someone to be trifled with, especially when he had mastered an alchemic fire, a killing technique that was extremely restraining. Losing a consciousness fruit was not a big deal. At most, he would just have to endure for a few more decades. However, if he continued to act tough, he might even lose his life here. This scene surprised Linny a little. After missing its attack, it immediately fled. This sky-devouring giant crocodile was indeed cunning. The sky-devouring giant crocodile fled very quickly. However, before it could escape more than 100 feet, a huge black hand grabbed at it at lightning speed and forcefully sucked it back. Soul Hook, Alchemic Fire, and Soul Hook. In this small ancient Jianghu, Lin Yi was the expert in dealing with primordial spirits. So powerful. Bing Wuqing's eyes lit up as she watched from the side. As for Chu Tianlu, who had accidentally entered a state of enlightenment, he finally woke up at this moment. He was dumbfounded when he saw this scene. At this moment, the one who was truly shocked was the sky-devouring giant crocodile. With its strength, it couldn't believe that it would fall at the hands of a mere human. The reason why it chose to flee was not because it felt that it was no match for him. It was purely because it had been bitten by a snake. Old freaks like it that had lived for countless years would always prioritize survival. As long as there was a way out, it would not easily take risks. But now, with Lin Yi's soul hook, it couldn't escape even if it wanted to. If it wasn't a primordial spirit, the sky-devouring giant crocodile would have been covered in cold sweat. Its primordial spirit, which was supposed to stand at the top of the small ancient Jianghu, actually had no power to fight back in front of the other party. The other party wanted to suck it in, but it could only obediently let itself be sucked in. Was this AF * King Nightmare? Of course, this wasn't a nightmare. Just like how it had eaten Bing Wuqing before, falling into Lin Yi's hands could only be considered unlucky. However, it couldn't accept this. Once the soul hook was used, according to Lin Yi's habit, it would basically be directly trapped in the space of the jade pendant. After that, it would be squeezed and flattened as needed. No one would be able to do anything in the space that he ruled. However, something unexpected happened. The soul hook, which had never made a mistake before, actually failed this time. The sky-devouring giant crocodile's primordial spirit wasn't directly trapped in the space of the jade pendant. Instead, it forcibly broke free from the powerful restraints of the soul hook at the last moment and forcibly attached itself to Lin Yi's body. A false accusation. Even Lin Yi couldn't help but be shocked. They were both primordial spirits. Even if the sky-devouring giant crocodile stood at the peak of the nascent soul stage, there was still a qualitative gap between them. However, he didn't expect to underestimate this guy. After all, it was a super ferocious beast. Once the sky-devouring giant crocodile went all out, it was quite a threat even to a nascent soul cultivator. Besides being cunning, it was still very fierce. Not only did it forcibly break free from the soul hook, it also wanted to take the opportunity to possess Lin Yi. Bing Wuqing was already enough to make it drool. If it could take over Lin Yi's body, its strength would even be comparable to its peak. At that time, even if it couldn't recover the powerful physical body of the sky-devouring giant crocodile, it would be enough to dominate the small ancient Jianghu. Everything was perfect. Unfortunately, the sky-devouring giant crocodile miscalculated one thing. The moment it invaded Lin Yi's body, it suddenly exclaimed, "You're not AF * King Human?" No matter how much it thought about it, it would never have thought that Lin Yi's body was actually a primordial spirit. The other party was actually a primordial spirit just like itself. Chapter 54-24. If he had known this would happen, he would not have considered possession. he would have just devoured the spirit directly. Now, he had chosen the wrong direction and used the wrong strength. The sky-devouring giant crocodile felt like it had used all its strength to punch empty air. It was so frustrating. If it was just uncomfortable, it would have been fine. The key was that it had lost the upper hand. Don't forget, primordial spirit devouring ability was not unique to it. It was really a mistake. Ever since he learned the essence of primordial spirit devouring ability from Joang, although Lin Yi had only used the soul hooking hand, it did not mean that he would not use primordial spirit devouring ability even if he was beaten to death. Previously, it was only because of psychological factors and the fear of the side effects that he did not dare to use it easily. Now that he was forced to this step, if he did not make a move, he would be taken over. There was nothing to worry about. The sky-devouring giant crocodile was about to use its devouring talent to make up for it. However, in the end, Lin Yi had already made the first move. This was like a life-and-death battle. It had just set one foot in the arena, and before it could even prepare, the other party had already chopped down with an axe. What could it do? You overestimate yourself. The sky-devouring giant crocodile snorted angrily. Although it was very surprised that the other party could also devour spirit, and that it had fallen into such a passive situation, it did not lose confidence. Devouring was the sky-devouring giant crocodile's special talent. Moreover, its spirit level was also top-notch in the pugilistic world. Who could devour who? The two spirits wanted to devour each other. This was a battle that belonged to the spirits. But soon, the sky-devouring giant crocodile was once again shrouded in shock. It was shocked to find that the other party's devouring ability was not inferior to its own. What was more exaggerated was that the other party was actually a mysterious ascending stage spirit. Just this alone directly sentenced the sky-devouring giant crocodile to death. Not only did it lose the upper hand, the key point was that the other party's strength was far above it. It was like a battle between two armies. In front of Lin Yi, it was almost defeated without the slightest resistance. The spirit of the dignified sky-devouring giant crocodile was directly devoured by Lin Yi. Phew! Lin Yi heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. Although this result was within his expectations, it was his first time devouring a primordial spirit after all. He was glad that it went so smoothly. The devouring continued. Although the sky-devouring giant crocodile had no power to resist, its level was destined that no matter how smooth it was, the process would not be too short. After all, it was a primordial spirit that stood at the peak of the Yuanying stage. It could almost be regarded as a half-step profound ascension. The volume of this divine sense was not small for Lin Yi. At the same time that he was devouring the soul, Lin Yi's aura suddenly became slightly unstable. After that, the fluctuation gradually grew larger, and it seemed to show signs of being on the verge of erupting. Is he going to break through? Bing Wuqing, who was beside him, was shocked when she sensed this scene. Lin Yi had always been unfathomable in her heart, but she had never known Lin Yi's specific realm. When she felt the strong primordial spirit fluctuation, she couldn't help but be stunned. It was actually the legendary mysterious ascension stage. Not only that, Lin Yi was also breaking through. Stay away from him. Bing Wuqing immediately reacted and drove Chu Tianlu to the side. She ignored her injuries and stayed by Lin Yi's side to protect him. The breakthrough process could not be disturbed by any external forces, otherwise the consequences would be unimaginable. Devouring the sky-devouring giant crocodile's primordial spirit was a response that Lin Yi had not planned. He had originally wanted to just use the soul-reaping hand, but the situation forced him to use this move. What surprised him the most was that he had unknowingly reached this step. Because of this opportunity, he had forcibly broken through. At a level like the mysterious ascension stage, it was extremely difficult to advance one level. This was an unexpected surprise for Lin Yi. Previously, he was already at the peak of the early stage of the mysterious ascension. If he successfully broke through this time, he would be at the middle stage of the mysterious ascension. However, surprise was surprise. At this moment, Lin Yi was not as overjoyed as he had expected. Relying on devouring primordial spirits to achieve a forced breakthrough was not the most ideal method for him. There were many hidden dangers involved. This hidden danger did not simply come from the opportunity itself, but mainly from the sky-devouring giant crocodile. This was because this crocodile was not a pure primordial spirit at all, but a sugar-coated bullet with poison. Unless one was as gifted as Jiuying, devouring primordial spirits would definitely have repercussions. This was a logical thing, and it was precisely because of this that Lin Yi was so against devouring primordial spirits. He had always only used the soul-reaping hand. If he was really focused on breaking through, he could have done so a long time ago. However, the path of cultivation was like walking on thin ice. Being greedy and advancing prematurely often did not lead to a good end. This time, Lin Yi was purely forced into a corner. This was Lin Yi's mentality. Now, although there was a pleasant surprise of breaking through, it was closely followed by trouble. Lin Yi suddenly realized that his primordial spirit, which had been strengthened, was no longer as pure as before. When devouring the primordial spirit of the other party, it was inevitable to absorb some of the other party's emotions and memories, especially the obsession before being devoured. This was a subtle influence, and no matter how strong a person was, they could not completely eliminate it. They could only rely on their own strong willpower to suppress it to the edge of their consciousness. After a long time, these things would gradually fade away with the wind. With Lin Yi's willpower, if the other party was just an ordinary person, to be honest, there would not be any special effect. His willpower was enough to control it freely. The problem was that the other party was a sky-devouring giant crocodile that had left a deep mark in the history of the ancient pugilistic world. It was an old monster that had lived for many years. This huge amount of information was simply overwhelming. Although it was Lin Yi who devoured its primordial spirit, it felt like a snake swallowing an elephant. Lin Yi was about to be stuffed to death by it. The pain in his brain was so intense that it felt like it was about to explode. In just a few seconds, Lin Yi felt that it was as long as a few years or decades. If it was an ordinary person, their consciousness would have long collapsed. Although he did not have the unique racial talent like Jiuying, Lin Yi relied on his heaven-defying willpower to hold on and finally escaped the disaster. However, Lin Yi did not have the chance to rejoice, nor did he have the time to feel the strength of the mysterious Ascension intermediate stage. He encountered a very troublesome problem. The primordial spirit tumor that was originally bothering the sky-devouring giant crocodile was not digested along with the primordial spirit of the sky-devouring giant crocodile. Instead, it was transferred to his head, stubbornly like a bone maggot. Chapter 54:25. Thinking about the causes and consequences of this, Lin Yi could not help but feel a headache. How could he deal with this thing? The good thing was that after this transfer, although these tumors weren't completely removed, they were weakened quite a bit. To Lin Yi, it was a headache, but it wasn't as bad as the sky-devouring crocodiles. It was still bearable. However, if he ignored it, who knew what would develop in the future? It would be fine if it gradually faded like other obsessions over time, but what if it became more and more intense like a malignant tumor? Judging from the experience of the sky-devouring giant crocodile, it was obviously not the former. Otherwise, it would not have these tumors after living for so many years. The more he thought about it, the more frightening the consequences were. Lin Yi would rather not upgrade than get involved in such trouble. Unfortunately, there was no if in this world. The sky-devouring giant crocodile did not have a chance to start over, and neither did he. Not more, not less, there are still 9 tumors. Lin Yi carefully checked himself 3 times, and this was the final conclusion. He did not know if a spirit knowledge fruit could resolve all these tumors. If a spirit knowledge fruit could only resolve 1 tumor, then it would be really troublesome. The good thing was that after the second transfer, other than making him feel uncomfortable and irritated, there weren't any other obvious side effects, and he could suppress it for a while. Lin Yi didn't know what to do with it, but there were no obvious side effects. He could suppress it for a while. Lin Yi could not help but sigh. His previous decision was very wise. Although the effect of the spirit devouring was immediate, it was really a very risky thing. Fortunately, he had been using the soul-reaping hand before. Otherwise, If he had devoured the spirit frequently, even without these troublesome spirit tumors, he would have long been affected by those remnant thoughts. An hour later, Lin Yi slowly opened his eyes. After his unremitting efforts, the 9 spirit tumors of different sizes had been suppressed by him to the edge. He was temporarily safe, but he had buried a bunch of irregular bombs. If he could not find a way to solve it as soon as possible, if they were detonated at the wrong time, he would really die without a burial place. Congratulations, boss. She only knew that Lin Yi's strength had increased by a level, and the thigh she was hugging had become even stronger. She was completely unaware of Lin Yi's current predicament. Haha, it's nothing. Lin Yi shook his head noncommittally. No one would be happy to be involved in such a situation. Of course, he had no intention of pouring out his grievances to Bing Wuqing. After all, Bing Wuqing wouldn't be able to help him even if he did, so he could only think of a solution himself. Bing Wuqing was even more impressed by Lin Yi's performance. Even though he was usually expressionless, he could not help but be overjoyed when he broke through to the next level. The higher the level, the rarer it was. He could not remain so indifferent. Standing up from the ground, Lin Yi sized up Bing Wuqing and asked, "Are your injuries serious?" "They're fine. I used to get frostbitten by myself when I was cultivating in the past, so I'm used to it." Bing Wuqing was an absolutely rational and pragmatic person, but she was an out-and-out lunatic when it came to cultivation. She challenged her limits almost every single time she cultivated. She had lost control of her heartless ice force at least 800 times, if not 1,000 times. She had suffered far more serious injuries than this one, so she had long gotten used to it. Moreover, her physique was special, and she constantly challenged her limits. Disregarding everything else, at least her resistance to the cold was second to none. Even Lin Yi could not be compared to her. Lin Yi nodded. If it were in the past, he would definitely give Bing Wuqing a checkup himself. But now, he was too preoccupied to bother with such things. Moreover, he could tell that Bing Wuqing's injuries were indeed not serious. Looking at the time, it was already evening. Once the tide rose, the entire cave would be flooded, so it was not a good idea to linger. Lin Yi was about to leave with Bing Wuqing at once. As for the spirit knowledge fruit, he would slowly study it after they got out. At this moment, Chu Tianlu, who had been chased away by Bing Wuqing, gathered his courage and came up to them. He bowed and expressed his gratitude. "My 2 benefactors, thank you for saving my life. I can't thank you enough. I can never repay your kindness. If there's anything I can do for you, I'll do my best to help you." The 2 of them looked at each other. Bing Wuqing did not know the cause and effect of what had happened, so she did not take this person to heart. Lin Yi, on the other hand, said with a hint of playfulness, "Repay your kindness? What can you do for us in your current state?" Chu Tianlu blushed involuntarily. His shoulder was pierced through, and one of his arms was crippled. He did not even have the strength to protect himself, let alone repay their kindness. On Tai Snake Island, a mere foundation building consummate was already a weakling, let alone being injured to such an extent. Although what he said just now was sincere gratitude, if he really wanted to compete, he was just saying it to sound nice. While Chu Tianlu was distracted, Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing had already strode towards the entrance of the cave. Since there was only one spirit knowledge fruit in this place, there was no point in staying any longer. They might as well get out as soon as possible. Chu Tianlu laughed bitterly and hurriedly followed behind. No matter what he planned to do, he had to get out of this cave first. Not long after, the 3 of them walked out of the cave and climbed back to the top of the cliff. This was not a difficult task for any foundation building expert. It was just a little more effort. "Where are we going next?" Bing Wuqing asked. She had come here purely to accompany Lin Yi. Of course, she had also thought about the consciousness fruit after coming here, but since there was only one, it had nothing to do with her anymore. Not only the underground cave, but if there were no accidents, it was probably the only one in the entire Tai Snake Island. Otherwise, the sky-devouring giant crocodile wouldn't have waited there. As for the other heavenly treasures, they were not important to her at her current level. They were not essential, and it all depended on Lin Yi's decision. Lin Yi pondered for a moment. In his current state, It was best for him to quickly find a place to go into seclusion and carefully study the effects of the spirit knowledge fruit on the 9 primordial spirit tumors, or if there were any other ways to resolve the 9 primordial spirit tumors. However, he had already suppressed all of them, so there was no hurry. Let's continue to walk forward and look for Ling Tianyu. I'm a little worried seeing how he was before, said Lin Yi. Although Ling Tianyu was not his little brother, they were friends. Moreover, if it were not for him this time, Lin Yi would not have had the opportunity to obtain the spirit knowledge fruit. If something really happened to Ling Tianyu here, he would feel very guilty. Chapter 54:26. Lin Yi lifted his head to take a look, then walked in the direction of the snake's head. Bing Wuqing followed closely behind, but the two of them stopped after a few steps. She turned to look at Chu Tianlu, who was following behind, and asked, "Why are you following us?" They had never met each other before. Although Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing had saved him before, it was just a side effect. They had never really wanted the other party to repay their kindness, nor would they take his words seriously. To be precise, they would never think about it at all. It was not strange for Chu Tianlu to follow them before. After all, he had to come out of the cave eventually. But it was a little unreasonable for him to still follow them at this time. Do you want to try your luck again? Look for the divine knowledge fruit in other places? Lin Yi asked. No, the divine knowledge fruit contains the essence of the Tai Snake clan. It will only grow one for a period of time, and there won't be a second one. Chu Tianlu shook his head. He had done a lot of research on this matter, so he was quite clear about it. Then what do you mean? Bing Wuqing's face instantly darkened. With her rational and pragmatic style, she would not allow such a guy to follow her. She had no intention of attacking an irrelevant person like Chu Tianlu, but if he got in her way, she would absolutely not hesitate. Facing the doubtful gazes of the two, Chu Tianlu found it a little difficult to speak. In the end, he braced himself and confessed, "I don't want to be separated from you two brothers. Otherwise, if I go out alone and meet Chu Tianliang on the way, I will definitely die. He won't let me go, and maybe he will find other helpers." These words sounded a little insatiable, but Chu Tianlu had no choice. If he was in his normal state, there would naturally be no problem for him to deal with Chu Tianliang. But now that he was seriously injured and had lost an arm, once he encountered Chu Tianliang at the peak of the late Foundation establishment stage, he would definitely be in danger. Although Chu Tianliang had escaped before, Chu Tianlu was almost certain that he would definitely not leave Tai Snake Island so easily. Now that they had shed all pretense of cordiality, this was his only chance to get rid of him. Otherwise, by the time he returned to the Middle Island, everything would be too late. Thus, Chu Tianliang would definitely think of a way to lie in ambush and look for a final opportunity. If he rashly left, it would be extremely easy for him to fall into the other party's trap. Moreover, if he didn't directly leave, it would still be extremely dangerous for him to wander around Tai Snake Island in his current state. Thus, without any other choice, Chu Tianlu could only thicken his face and come up with this plan. Only by following closely behind Lin Yi and Ling Yun would he be able to find a path of survival. "You're quite honest," Bing Wuqing said. She didn't show any signs of annoyance or admiration. In her eyes, Chu Tianlu was just an insignificant passerby. That was all. When Lin Yi heard this, a strange expression appeared on his face. He suddenly grinned playfully and said, "How do you know that I won't kill you?" Huh. Chu Tianlu was instantly dumbfounded. He was so stunned that he couldn't speak. Although the two of them didn't have any friendship with him, their previous experiences had indeed saved his life. Normal people wouldn't think of them as enemies. Otherwise, why would he be so thick-skinned as to take a yard after being given an inch? Chu Tianlu wasn't the only one who heard this. Even Bing Wuqing was a little dumbfounded. She thought about the other party's identity, then looked at Lin Yi's half-smiling expression, and then came to a sudden realization. Why? Why do you want to kill me? Chu Tianlu was still in a daze. You tell him. Lin Yi gestured at Bing Wuqing with his lips. You're a descendant of the Chu clan, right? It looks like you're an outstanding talent of the younger generation. It's very likely that you'll be the one to form a marriage alliance with the Yiling sect. Bing Wuching's speculations were all on point. She then said, "Do you know who Duan Muyu from the Yiling sect is?" W. "Who is she?" Chu Tianlu asked. "She's my boss's woman." Lin Yi and Duan Muyu only had vague feelings for each other. Neither of them had made it clear, but Bing Wuching's words directly confirmed their status. Cough, cough, cough. What? Chu Tianlu was so shocked that his jaw dropped. He was in a daze for a long time before he came to his senses. He asked doubtfully, is this true? Do you think I have the spare time to lie to you? Bing Wuching curled her lips. He was a dignified expert at the peak of the early nascent soul realm. According to the rules of the immemorial martial world, it was difficult for someone like Chu Tianlu to even meet him, let alone talk nonsense like this. Chu Tianlu could only smile bitterly and speechlessly. For him, this trip to Taishi Island was inseparable from Duan Muyu. He didn't even greet her before, but he almost died because of her. He was saved by Lin Yi and Chu Tianliang. He thought that he was lucky to have met a good person, but he didn't expect that it was actually related to her. This was really a coincidence. After being embarrassed for a long time, Chu Tianlu didn't know what to say. Although he had already said to Chu Tianliang that he had never thought about the marriage alliance, his only thought now was to cultivate without being disturbed. The problem was that even if Chu Tianliang didn't believe him, would Lin Yi believe him? Duan Muyu was Lin Yi's woman, and he, Chu Tianlu, was an outstanding talent of the Chu family's younger generation. No matter what he thought, objectively speaking, he was indeed the most likely candidate for marriage alliance. Chapter 54:27. Chu Tianlu's eyes brightened, and he hurriedly said, "I'm not afraid. It's better than dying." "Okay, in that case, you can follow me." Lin Yi didn't mind. To be honest, this was also because he was satisfied with Chu Tianlu's attitude. Otherwise, if this guy coveted Duan Muyu like Chu Tianliang, even if he didn't kill him directly, he definitely wouldn't take care of him like this. The three of them immediately set off together. Tai Snake Island was long and narrow, and there were basically no forks in the road. The direction of their advance was very clear, which was the snake head in the distance. On the way, Chu Tianlu acted very reserved, mainly because he felt awkward. Lin Yi, on the other hand, was fine. After all, the marriage alliance between House Chu and Yi Ling didn't have much to do with Chu Tianlu. Even if he really did become a candidate for the marriage, he was just a puppet who had no choice. Not only was it unfair, but it was also meaningless to vent his anger on him. Moreover, for Lin Yi, the key to this matter was Duan Muyu's attitude. As long as this was confirmed, the Yiling sect and the Chu family weren't a big problem. As a profound ascension middle-stage existence, Lin Yi obviously had this kind of vision. Without mentioning Duan Muyu, Lin Yi asked a lot about the Chu family's shadow martial arts. Although the level of the battle he saw before was a little low, it still gave him a lot of inspiration and enlightenment. If he could absorb the essence of it, whether it was directly copying the Chu family's shadow martial arts or improving and integrating it into his own moves, it would be of great use. Chu Tianlu didn't hold back anything he knew. Logically speaking, there were many essences that shouldn't be revealed to outsiders, but right now he had the mentality of repaying a debt of gratitude. Not to mention that Lin Yi was just casually asking a few questions. Even if Lin Yi wanted the Chu family's secret manual for the shadow element, he'd probably think of a way to get it. Bing Wuching had been listening on the side all the way. She had a much deeper understanding of the Chu family's shadow system martial arts than before, but that was all. However, what made her and Chu Tianlu dumbfounded was that Lin Yi had actually started to use the shadow step as they walked. Although he wasn't very proficient at it, and the effects weren't that great, he was already at the beginner level. Chu Tianlu was stupefied. How long had it been? It hadn't even been 2 incense sticks worth of time. Yet he could already use the shadow step? It had to be known that even the most talented disciple of the Chu clan would need at least 2 years of hard work to master a high-level movement technique like the shadow step. However, Lin Yi had only spent 2 years, and he hadn't even gone through any systematic training. All he had done was listen to Chu Feng's idle chatter. When comparing goods, you have to throw them away. When comparing people, you have to die. The ancients did not deceive me. Similarly, Bing Wuqing's shock was no less than Chu Tianlu's. When it came to geniuses, he could be considered the top genius in the ancient Jianghu, and only people like Ling Tianyu could be mentioned in the same breath as him. But even he couldn't master other people's martial arts techniques as easily as Lin Yi. This was not just a matter of comprehension. More importantly, she was restricted by her mental cultivation method. If Bing Wuqing were to cultivate the Chu family's shadow-type martial arts techniques, she would definitely go berserk. Just like that, they walked for 4 hours. Suddenly, 2 young cultivators in front of them shouted for help. They scrambled and ran towards the 3 of them, as if something extremely terrifying was chasing after them. Chu Tianlu was still talking to Lin Yi about the shadow-shifting urn. When he saw the 2 people in front of him, his expression changed drastically. He wanted to rush forward without saying anything, but Lin Yi pulled him back. "What are you doing? Those are my friends. I want to save them." Chu Tianlu seemed to have completely forgotten that he was injured at the moment. He couldn't even use half of his normal strength. Even if he rushed forward, he wouldn't be able to save them. Instead, he would get himself killed. Even if you want to be loyal, you have to look at the situation. This is not the way to die. Lin Yi snorted. He grabbed Chu Tianlu with one hand and Bing Wuqing with the other, then turned around and ran. For this, he didn't even hesitate to use the extreme butterfly subtle steps. This was the extreme of his movement technique. Before Chu Tianlu could react to what was happening, he had already been brought several miles away by Lin Yi. His face was deathly pale. He stuck out his tongue and stammered, so fast. Not to mention him, even Bing Wuqing couldn't help but be terrified and moved. She had fought seriously with Lin Yi before. During this period of time, she had long developed both respect and fear for Lin Yi. However, even though she had already raised Lin Yi's strength to an extremely high level, after personally experiencing Lin Yi's terrifying speed, which seemed to break through everything, she was still as shocked as Chu Tianlu. The limit of a human's speed could actually reach such an astounding level? Bing Wuqing's feelings were exactly the same as those of Lin Yi's lackeys. Following such a freak, her worldview would be refreshed from time to time. In the beginning, she would still make a fuss about nothing, but as time passed, she would gradually become used to it. "Boss, is there danger ahead?" After such a shock, even Bing Wuqing's tone was a little shaken. Cultivation was like climbing a mountain. Every time she climbed a mountain, she would be wild with joy, thinking that she had climbed to the top of the world. However, she would immediately be doused with a bucket of cold water, because there was always a higher mountain. After reaching the top, what she saw was a taller mountain and a wider world. He was in such a state now. Although the peak of the early nascent soul realm was not the top of the nascent soul realm, it was not far away. He could almost see the scenery of the top of the small, ancient martial world with a single glance. However, now that Lin Yi had lifted the lid, he realized that he was basically a frog at the bottom of a well, just like everyone else. There was still a long way to go in the future. "I don't know either, but I am sure of one thing. There is something extremely dangerous ahead, so we should avoid it if we can." Lin Yi's expression was a little solemn. The reason why he had suddenly taken the 2 of them and fled with all his might just now was because the jade pendant was frantically warning him. One had to know that the jade pendant's warning was very intelligent, and it would only warn him when there was a real threat to him. Under normal circumstances, most enemies would not even make a sound. Although the jade pendant had also warned him when he had discovered the sky-devouring giant crocodile, it was far less urgent than it was now. It was clear that the thing ahead was no small matter. The 9 malignant tumors of his primordial spirit had not been dealt with yet, and Lin Yi did not want to get into any more trouble. Bing Wuqing's heart trembled when she heard that. This Taishi Island was really not simple. Even someone as powerful as Lin Yi had to be so cautious. Chapter 54:28. He didn't dare to implicate Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing, but he had to go back himself, even if it cost him his life. "You're so troublesome." Bing Wuqing frowned. She didn't have a good impression of Chu Tianlu in the first place, and now she felt that this guy didn't know what was good for him. In her opinion, they weren't friends at all. Since Chu Tianlu wanted to die, then let him die. Linny admired him quite a bit. There weren't many people who could be so loyal these days. Chu Tianlu was a rare weirdo, and Lin Yi couldn't bear to watch him die. He could only smile bitterly and say, "Forget it. For the sake of the divine knowledge fruit, I'll go back and take a look. You guys stay here and don't come over." "You don't have to, Brother Lin. You've already done everything you could for me. Hurry up and go. Don't worry about me. I'm just going to take a look. I'll help if I can, but if I can't, then forget it. I won't do anything stupid on impulse," Chu Tianlu said sincerely. Bing Wuqing didn't say anything, but her expression didn't agree either. Her logic was very simple. It was meaningless to take risks for an outsider she didn't know, especially someone at Lin Yi's level. "Just take a look? Do you have that ability?" Lin Yi rolled his eyes at Chu Tianlu. With Chu Tianlu's insignificant strength, he'd basically lose his life if he took a look at something that even he was afraid of. Chu Tianlu blushed with shame. His words weren't exactly polite, but he had no room to refute them. He could only watch helplessly as Lin Yi abandoned him and Bing Wuqing turned around and went back. In the blink of an eye, he was already gone. Returning to where they were just now, even Lin Yi couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart when he saw the scene in front of him. Chu Tianlu's two friends were still screaming and running for their lives, but a dark mass was following closely behind them. At first glance, it looked like a dark cloud covering their heads, like a sandstorm. In terms of speed, it was much faster than the two of them, and it seemed that they couldn't escape anymore. At this moment, the tall man who was running in front had a ferocious look on his face. He suddenly pulled out his sword and sent a sharp sword chi behind him. He was forced into a dead end and had no other choice. However, he was not going to turn around and fight to the death with that black mass. His target was actually another young cultivator who was following closely behind him. They had been best friends for decades, and that person did not expect his best friend to be so vicious at such a critical moment of life and death. Two people were being chased by the same tiger. If they wanted to escape, they didn't need to be able to outrun the tiger. They just needed to be able to outrun the other person. This was a principle that everyone knew. It was just that he didn't expect this to happen to him. The sword chi came right at his head, and the young cultivator hurriedly dodged. The sword chi almost brushed past his scalp, cutting off a strand of his black hair. It was a dangerous situation, but it was not worth celebrating. Because he was dodging the sword chi, his footsteps unconsciously paused for a moment, and in that short moment, the black cloud behind him had already firmly enveloped him, and then, like maggots attached to a bone, a large ball firmly stuck to his body, unable to be removed, and he could no longer escape. At the same time, the tall man who escaped first did not get out of danger as expected. After all, it was not a tiger that was chasing them. The black cloud that enveloped the young cultivator split into two at the same time, but he did not fall behind it all. Instead, he chased even closer. A terrifying buzzing sound that made people's scalps numb sounded in his ears, getting closer and closer. "Help! Help!" The tall man saw the figure of Lin Yi in front of him and immediately thought that he had caught a life-saving straw. He quickly shouted. In this situation, if no one reached out to help, he would definitely die. Lin Yi looked on coldly. Before this, he had the intention to save him, but after seeing this guy's action just now, he completely gave up on this idea. This kind of person would be a disaster even if he was saved, so it was better to let him fend for himself. However, what really concerned Lin Yi was the layer of black cloud that covered the two of them. At first glance, it was a little difficult to see with the naked eye at a distance of tens of feet. He thought it was just a layer of strange black cloud, but if he looked closely, he would find that it was not a black cloud at all, but a large group of extremely tiny insects. At first glance, they looked a bit like beetles, but their bodies were much smaller, and each of them was black and shiny, as if they were wrapped in a layer of strange black grease. Once they were glued to them, they would be everywhere, including the 5 senses and 7 orifices, and even the pores and hair follicles of the whole body. They would crazily drill in, making a sizzling sound. As Lin Yi looked on coldly from the side, the two of them had already sunk into a final struggle. They had already been firmly entangled by these black insects, and had no chance of escaping. The only thing they could do was put up a final struggle. From afar, the two of them seemed to have gone mad as they beat their bodies with all their might. Even if they beat themselves to the point where their skin and flesh were lacerated, or even crazily vomiting blood, they still didn't care. You've both gone mad. In the end, Chu Tianlu still followed them over. When he saw this scene, he hurriedly went up to help. As a good friend of many years, he couldn't just watch the two of them mutilate themselves. Linny extended his hand and stopped him. Open your eyes and look carefully. They're slapping the insects on their bodies. If I'm not mistaken, once these black insects attach themselves to a body, they will crazily drill into it. Even if they attach themselves to the outside, they will crazily suck blood. If you don't want to die, then stand there and don't move. Insects? Chu Tianlu was taken aback. Those black insects were practically indistinguishable to the naked eye, and with his strength at this distance, he couldn't see them clearly, let alone see as clearly as Linny did. There are actually such terrifying insects in this world. It's really appalling. Bing Wuqing had also caught up. When she saw this scene, her expression changed. She had originally thought that with her current strength, she could go to any dangerous place in the immemorial underworld. She didn't expect this tiny Thai snake island to be so dangerous. The sky-devouring crocodile from before was already enough to kill her. The threat of these tiny black insects in front of her was even greater. Coming here to take risks, it was fine if one was lucky. But if one was unlucky and encountered the sky-devouring crocodile and the terrifying black insects one after another like they did, ordinary gold core and foundation establishment experts wouldn't be able to survive even if they had 10 lives. Seeing that the injuries of the two people in front of him were getting more and more serious, and even showing signs of bleeding from their 7 orifices, Chu Tianlu couldn't hold himself back anymore. He knew that he couldn't save the two of them. The only one who could possibly help him save the two of them was Lin Yi. However, Lin Yi had saved his life before. It was already extremely benevolent of him to agree to let him tag along. How could he have the face to ask Lin Yi to take such a huge risk for 2 unrelated outsiders? Chapter 54:29. Chu Tianlu clenched his teeth, as if he had made a great decision. He said in a low voice, "Brother Lin, although it's very shameless to say this, I beg you to help me. Don't worry, I won't let you risk your life for nothing. In return, I'll tell you a big secret." A big secret? Linny looked at him a little playfully. He'd thought that Chu Tianlu wasn't a bad person, but he definitely wasn't an idiot with water in his head. He clearly had nothing to do, yet he insisted on going with the two of them. Didn't that mean he had nothing better to do? It should be known that even if he left by himself, as long as he was careful, he was actually quite sure that he could avoid Chu Tianliang. If he seized the opportunity, he could directly leave and return to the Middle Island. Why did he force himself to follow the two of them and take risks? Now, Lin Yi finally understood a little. Chu Tianlu looked at Lin Yi nervously, for fear that the other party would be indifferent. Fortunately, Lin Yi did not disappoint him. After a slight smile, he dashed forward in a flash. When they were dozens of feet away, these black insects did not take the initiative to target them for the time being. However, once Lin Yi approached, a part of them immediately stuck to him. That kind of crazy, close-range manner was really daunting. In particular, there was a trace of inexplicable pressure on them. It seemed that they were higher creatures, and human practitioners were just nutrients waiting for them to absorb. Boom! Lin Yi raised his hand and shot out a 5 elements murderous aura. The black insects immediately fell to the ground, but then they buzzed again. Not even one was killed on the ground. Lin Yi could not help but twitch his eyelids. Although the strength of his primordial spirit was not high, the 5 elements murderous aura was a very high-end martial arts technique after all. Its power was not trivial. It should not be that he could not even kill a small black insect, right? The truth was in front of him. No matter how speechless Lin Yi was, it was useless. Those glossy black insects seemed to be purely shaken by his 5 elements murderous aura and were not affected at all. Then, they pounced on him again without losing any momentum. As for Lin Yi, He seemed to be stunned. He just stood there, motionless, without dodging. Brother Lin, danger. Upon seeing this, Chu Tianlu, who remained several dozen meters behind him, became extremely anxious. He had begged Lin Yi to help him, but he had never thought that he would have to make Lin Yi pay with his life here. He immediately felt endless regret in his heart. If he had known earlier, he wouldn't have begged Lin Yi to help him. Wasn't this harming him? However, he could only look on helplessly, unable to do anything. As a result, after a large swarm of black insects pounced on Lin Yi, they directly passed through his body without any resistance. Although it looked like they were firmly trapped like the previous two people, they did not harm Lin Yi at all. They withstood the murderous aura of the 5 elements unscathed, and Lin Yi was also immune to their attacks. Chu Tianlu looked at this scene and was stunned. For words were clearly written on his face. I don't understand, but I think it's awesome. He had no idea how Lin Yi did it, but this did not prevent him from sincerely admiring Lin Yi from the bottom of his heart. No matter where the strong went, they would be respected, and Chu Tianlu was no exception. Not far away, Chu Tianlu's 2 friends were still struggling. Seeing that they were about to reach the end, there was not much time left for Lin Yi to think about countermeasures. Not long after, Lin Yi suddenly raised his hand, and a fiery fist intent instantly surged and released from his fist. Wildfire Fist. Due to the limitation of the spirit's strength during this period of time, Lin Yi always directly used spirit's moves like the soul hook hand, and tried to avoid these moves that needed to be performed with a physical body. Only in this way could he display the strength of the profound ascension stage. Otherwise, even if he was much stronger than ordinary experts of the foundation establishment stage, his strength would still be limited. Wildfire Fist was undoubtedly the simplest and most basic move among all his physical moves. In terms of power, it was much weaker than the murderous aura of the 5 elements. Normally, it would not be used at all. Logically speaking, these strange black insects in front of him could even easily withstand the power of the murderous aura of the 5 elements, let alone a mere wildfire fist. However, the result was shocking. A large swarm of black insects that were hit fell to the ground, but this time they did not fly up unscathed like before. Instead, they became charred corpses, and the air was confused with an inexplicable strong burnt smell. So afraid of fire? Even Lin Yi himself was surprised. Most insects were afraid of fire, but he was just giving it a try, and did not have much hope. He did not expect the effect to be so outstanding. At this time, Bing Wuqing also came over. If even Lin Yi was helpless against these black insects, with his style, he would definitely stand far away and not get involved in this mess. However, now that it was proven that these black insects were not without weaknesses, there was no need for him to stay far away from them. Logically speaking, since these black insects were so afraid of fire, they must be very afraid of the cold as well. His merciless ice force, which he was best at, came in handy. As expected, once merciless ice force was activated, a large swarm of black insects fell to the ground around Bing Wuqing. They were all frozen black insects. It looked like it was much more effective than Lin Yi's frenzied fire fist. After all, he was an expert at the peak of the early nascent soul realm, and the range of merciless ice force was much larger than that of a mere frenzied fire fist, so the effect was naturally more immediate. However, before Bing Wuqing could be a little complacent, the black insects that had been frozen into ice began to move. They were not frozen to death, but were only temporarily trapped by the ice, and would soon break out of it. Not long after, a large swarm of black insects once again rose into the air, unscathed. This time, they clearly focused their attention on Bing Wuqing. Bing Wuqing's heart tightened, and she could not help but think to herself that she had miscalculated. If she had known this would happen, she would not have rushed up recklessly. After all, she was not a pure primordial spirit like Lin Yi, whose body could transform into a primordial spirit at any time, and was completely immune to the black insects' attacks. If she was really surrounded by these black insects, she would not end up any better than the other 2 unlucky fellows. Get out of my way. Lin Yi shook his head. There were indeed a lot of black insects in front of him, and they were practically overwhelming at close range. Although the effect of his frenzied fire fist was outstanding, the problem was that it did not cover a large area. On top of that, these black insects were extremely fast and could be evaded easily. If he were to simply rely on his frenzied fire fist to attack them, he would probably not be able to kill them all by nightfall. By then, the people around him would have all died. However, since it was proven that fire-type martial arts techniques were effective, Lin Yi's methods were naturally not limited to the frenzied fire fist. After all, he had quite a number of fire-type techniques. Chapter 54:30. Of course, Lin Yi didn't know any cloning techniques. At this moment, he was actually using a fire-type technique that he hadn't used for a long time. It was the modified version of Mu Linsun's 1,000 transformations, Mu Linsun's frenzied fire fist. The black insects fell in large numbers again, and the burnt smell in the air was several times stronger than before. The effect was much better than the frenzied fire fist, as the clones closed in and greatly limited the black insect's space to escape. This move alone was dozens of times more effective than before. But this was far from enough. Although some of the black insects were killed, they seemed to be gathering from afar. Not only did their numbers not decrease, but they were also becoming more and more intense. The already irritating buzzing sound became even more earth-shattering. Not only the two unlucky fellows, but even Bing Wuqing, who had joined the battle, and Chu Tianlu, who was watching from afar, were in imminent danger. Bing Wuqing began to panic. Although the effect of Lin Yi's Mu Linsun's frenzied fire fist was inspiring, the current situation was not optimistic. She was a little regretful that she had advanced too rashly. If she had stayed at Chu Tianlu's position, she could have easily escaped with her strength. Unfortunately, she had been too impulsive just now. She knew that she didn't leave a good impression on Lin Yi, especially with the stain of leaving someone to die in the river of divine knowledge. Now that Lin Yi had advanced to the next level, she had to find a way to perform well in front of Lin Yi. Only then would she be truly trusted and obtain more benefits, such as the golden nascent gathering pill. Bing Wuqing, who was as calm and rational as she was, still had times when she miscalculated. More and more black insects appeared. She relied on the merciless ice force to freeze them into ice slags again and then watched them break out of the ice unscathed. Not only that, but after a few times, she was shocked to find that these black insects had developed an immunity to her merciless ice force. The time it took for them to freeze into ice slags became shorter and shorter, and some of them didn't even fall. They shook off the ice slags on the surface of their bodies in the air, and then continued to pounce ferociously with a buzzing sound. In such a short period of time, such an amazing ability to adapt, the black insect's innate talent was truly astounding. It had far surpassed common sense. In this way, not only was Bing Wuqing unable to deal with these black insects, but she was also gradually losing the ability to rescue herself. If she were to end up like those two unlucky fellows and the black insects burrowed into her skin, her only outcome would be to bleed from her orifices until she completely collapsed. At this moment, Bing Wuqing wished more than anything that she was a fire elemental expert. Even if she was only in the foundation establishment stage, even if she couldn't kill as easily as Lin Yi, she would at least be able to protect herself. But now, as a dignified expert at the peak of the early nascent soul realm, she was actually being tormented by a swarm of black worms to the point of being helpless. It was truly unbelievable. On the other hand, after Lin Yi had performed Mu Linsun's frenzy fists a few times, the ground around him was littered with the carcasses of the black insects. It looked like he had made a lot of progress, but it was a pity that he could not keep up with the number of black insects that were rushing toward him. Not only that, these black insects seemed to have a high level of intelligence. When they realized that they posed no threat to Lin Yi at all, and would only suffer one-sided abuse instead, they all turned around and turned toward Bing Wuqing and the others. The situation was getting more and more dangerous. Wuqing, take Chu Tianlu away from here, Lin Yi instructed in a low voice. At this moment, Chu Tianlu had not been completely entangled by the black insects, and Bing Wuqing could rely on the merciless ice aura to resist them for a short while, so there was still a chance for her to escape. As for Chu Tianlu's two unlucky friends, they had long been tortured to death by the black insects, and there was no way they could escape. Bing Wuqing was stunned. She had already planned to escape, and now that she heard Lin Yi's instructions, she retreated without hesitation. She even brought Chu Tianlu, who was watching nervously from a short distance away. His speed was far from that of a freak like Lin Yi, and his speed was not his forte either. But after all, his level of strength was still there, and he was still many times faster than someone like Chu Tianlu. When Bing Wuqing and Chu Tianlu were a little further away, Lin Yi took a deep breath. His entire body was surging with heat, and even the air around him began to distort. It was as if his entire person was about to melt on the spot. Gathering his aura, Lin Yi suddenly threw a punch at the void in front of him. At first glance, it did not look any different from before. It was still the frenzied fire fist, but this time, there were fire crystals in the air that were hard to see with the naked eye. A single frenzied fire fist was like a line of fire that ignited a bag of explosives. These fire crystals exploded with a loud bang almost at the same time, and the deafening booms rang out incessantly, shaking the earth and mountains. Hiss! In the distance, Bing Wuqing and Chu Tianlu gasped at the same time, their eyes filled with shock. Not to mention Chu Tianlu. Even Bing Wuqing had never seen a move that covered such a large area. In an instant, the area in front of them had become a sea of fire hell. It was no wonder that Lin Yi had asked the two of them to retreat, or they would definitely die in there. Frenzied fire, thousand bursts fist. Such a high-level, explosive move could be said to be as rare as phoenix feathers and qilin horns in the immemorial martial world. In fact, with the strength of Lin Yi's primordial spirit, it was actually very difficult for him to use this move. Although it was not as profound and exquisite as the killing aura of the five elements, it was still extremely demanding on his physical strength. Otherwise, he would not even be able to condense fire crystals, let alone the frenzied fire thousand bursts. Lin Yi had completely relied on the powerful primordial spirit of his profound ascension middle stage primordial spirit to force his primordial spirit to use a move that exceeded its upper limit. That was how the scene before them had happened. The concentrated sounds of explosions quickly died down. Everything in front of them was red, and the air was filled with scorching flames. It was only when these flames dissipated with the wind that Bing Wuqing and Chu Tianlu stared at the scene before them, dumbfounded. The overwhelming swarm of black insects had completely disappeared. In their place were layers upon layers of corpses on the ground, and the air was filled with a pungent smell of burnt flesh. The terrifying swarm of black insects that had almost driven them to a dead end had been dealt with by a single punch from Lin Yi. It sounded unbelievable, but this was the truth that had been laid out in front of them. Ugh! Not far away, a cry of pain came from the pile of black insect corpses. A person struggled to climb to his feet. His body was riddled with wounds, and there were also some burn marks, but they were not obvious. Although the frenzied fire thousand bursts was not completely controllable, it was not as if there was no control at all. This was especially true when one's primordial spirit was at a higher level, and one's ability to control various details was stronger. A profound ascension middle stage primordial spirit like Lin Yi could be said to have a strategic advantage. Even if the difficulty was increased because it was not his main body, it was unlikely that he would accidentally kill Chu Tianlu's two unlucky friends. Of course, some burns were unavoidable. Otherwise, even if he dealt with the black insect swarm in the air, the insects that were stuck to their bodies would not be completely removed, and the only outcome would be death. Chapter 54:31. However, the two of them were still very thankful. No matter how miserable they were, they still survived and escaped the calamity. Brother Jingze, Brother Qingfeng, are you all right? Chu Tianlu hurriedly ran over. He truly cared about these two friends of his, and was completely unaware of the scene that had just occurred. If he knew that his friend's moral qualities were comparable to Chu Tianliang's, he probably wouldn't be so nervous. I'm all right. The tall man called by Jingze glanced at the person behind him with an extremely unnatural expression. His previous actions had almost completely offended this companion of his. Putting himself in their shoes, if he was the other person, he would definitely not stop once he caught his breath. Fortunately, the other Zhang Qingfeng didn't look in his direction. Instead, he was half lying on the ground, panting. He was the first victim of the black insects, and his injuries were far more serious than Bai Jing's. Of course, he was also in a more sorry state. That's good, that's good. Chu Tianlu was so concerned that he completely didn't notice that something was wrong. He carefully helped the two of them up and generously gave them the clan's healing medicine he had brought with him. Although it wasn't a holy medicine, it was very effective for external injuries. However, he didn't bring much this time. He used half and gave the other half to the two of them. In this way, he didn't even have his own spare medicine. Thank you, Bai Jingzi said with a pale face. On the other side, Zhang Qingfeng didn't say anything. He just silently allowed Chu Tianlu to help him apply the medicine. His head was lowered so that no one could see his expression. We've grown up together. What's there to thank me for? Chu Tianlu frowned to express his dissatisfaction, then asked, Didn't the two of you say you wanted to go to the snake's head to take a look? How did you provoke these insects? The terrain of Tai Snake Island, from the lowest snake's tail to the highest snake's head, could be seen at a glance. Normal people would want to climb to the top of the snake's head after coming here, but there were very few people who could reach that step. Although the terrain was simple, it could only ensure that they wouldn't get lost, but it didn't mean that they could easily walk through it. In terms of the small pugilistic world of the far ancient era, there were almost no weaklings who came here. But for Taishi Island, even a nascent soul-old monster like Bing Wuching might not be enough, let alone those golden core stage or even foundation building stage cultivators. If one wanted to reach the snake head's position, apart from necessary strength, the most important thing was luck. If one's luck wasn't good, everything else would be useless. Bai Jingzi and Zhang Qingfeng's luck clearly wasn't all that great. If it weren't for Chu Tianlu's pleading, they would already be two corpses that were too horrible to look at. Zhang Qingfeng still didn't say anything. Bai Jingzi glanced at him and explained, Actually, it's nothing. We just accidentally provoked them along the way. How unlucky. Accidentally? Chu Tianlu was stunned for a moment, his eyes filled with disbelief. As for Lin Yi and Bing Wuching beside him, they didn't believe his words at all. Accidentally provoking so many terrifying black insects? Was he trying to fool a child? No matter how ferocious and terrifying a spirit beast was, as long as it didn't actively attack it or enter its core territory, it wouldn't take the initiative to attack human cultivators. After all, they all had spiritual intelligence. In this era where human cultivators were the dominant force, no spirit beast would recklessly make an enemy out of humans, let alone act as crazily as the swarm of black insects just now to the point of disregarding the consequences. Anyone could see that Bai Jingzi was being perfunctory. Strictly speaking, it wasn't really an accident. The main thing was that we saw a heaven and earth treasure, so we subconsciously approached it. We didn't expect something to happen. Bai Jingzi hurriedly tried to salvage the situation. What heaven and earth treasure? Lin Yi asked casually. Heaven and earth treasures were always guarded by spirit beasts, especially the rarer the treasure, the more troublesome and fierce the spirit beasts around it. This was common sense. Judging from the terrifying swarm of black insects just now, the level of the heaven and earth treasure was definitely not simple. It must be a rare treasure in the world. This actually, I don't know either. I don't know much about elixirs, but it seems to be worth some spirit jade. Bai Jingzi was still trying to hide the truth from them. Don't play dumb. At this moment, Zhang Qingfeng, who had been silent since the beginning, suddenly spoke. His words were shocking. We saw the spirit knowledge fruit. Spirit knowledge fruit? Lin Yi and the other two were all shocked. Bai Jingzi couldn't help but frown at Zhang Qingfeng, very dissatisfied. Was this guy crazy? How could he reveal such important information to others? In his mind, he didn't have the slightest notion of repaying Lin Yi for saving them. He only had one thing on his mind, and that was to be able to find the fruit of consciousness. It was a great opportunity given to him by the heavens, and no one could take it away from him. Zhang Qingfeng originally did not want to easily reveal the spirit knowledge fruit to Lin Yi and the others. If possible, He would be happy to share the spirit knowledge fruit with Bai Jingze. Unfortunately, after the scene just now, a huge gap had appeared between the two of them. Even if it was just to vent his anger, he would never let Bai Jingze succeed. Wasn't there only one spirit knowledge fruit? Chu Tianlu looked surprised. Of all the people present, he should be the one who had done the most homework in this regard. There was only one spirit knowledge fruit at any one time. This was the conclusion he came to. The previous heaven-devouring giant crocodile's performance had also indirectly confirmed this point. The spirit knowledge fruit in the underground cave had obviously been taken away by Lin Yi, so how could another one have appeared? Could you have mistaken it for someone else? Lin Yi asked. He was worried that one spirit knowledge fruit wouldn't be enough. If there really was another one, it couldn't be better. How could I have mistaken it for someone else? It's shaped like a snake's gallbladder and has so many terrifying black insects guarding it. If it isn't a spirit knowledge fruit, what could it be? Zhang Qingfeng shook his head. Anyone who came here basically came for the spirit knowledge fruit, and he was naturally no exception. He might not know about other natural treasures, but it was impossible for him to not recognize the spirit knowledge fruit. Lin Yi and Chu Tianlu looked at each other, pausing for a moment before taking out the spirit knowledge fruit from the jade pendant space and asking, "Is it this one?" Bai Jingze and Zhang Qingfeng were stunned when they saw it, both of them swallowing a mouthful of saliva. Their eyes couldn't help showing greed, especially Bai Jingze, whose eyes almost fell out of their sockets. Fortunately, although he was envious, he did not lose his reason. They had seen Lin Yi's performance just now, and with that kind of strength, even if they were given 10,000 times more courage, they would not dare to snatch it. It's this one. The spirit knowledge fruit we saw is exactly the same as this one. Since Zhang Qingfeng had already revealed it, Bai Jingze could no longer continue to hide it and could only nod. Chapter 54:32. Chu Tianlu's knowledge of the spirit knowledge fruit came from the family's ancient books. Could it be that it was written wrong? But that was not right. Even if the ancient books were wrong, the giant sky-devouring crocodile had no reason to help deceive people, right? Lin Yi also fell into deep thought. Logically speaking, it was unlikely that a heavenly treasure like the spirit knowledge fruit would appear at the same time, but nothing was absolute. Perhaps something had happened. In any case, since he knew there was a second spirit knowledge fruit, Lin Yi could not ignore it. He was still counting on this thing to help him completely resolve the 9 spirit tumors. In that case, please lead the way. Although it was a request, Lin Yi's tone was unquestionable. Not to mention that he had saved their lives, even if they did not know each other. In this world where strength was respected, the other party would not dare to refuse. Bai Jingze was somewhat reluctant. He had been planning to sneak back, but now his plan had failed. The key was that he had almost torn all pretense of cordiality with Zhang Qingfeng. He did not even have the chance to respond perfunctorily, so he could only obediently lead the way. Their destination wasn't far. After all, with the speed of the Black Swarm, and Bai Jingze and Zhang Qingfeng were only experts at the Great Circle of Foundation establishment, being able to escape this far was already their limit. Any further, and they wouldn't be able to escape. Along the way, they encountered some scattered black insects from time to time. There were not many of them, but if Lin Yi was not present, the others would probably have a headache. None of them could use fire attribute martial skills, so there was no way to deal with them. But now it was simple. Lin Yi could easily open a path with a frenzied fist. Not long after, the group of 5 came to a rather secluded and remote place. The terrain of Tai Snake Island was simple. Under the cover of the dense forest, there were many places that were rarely known. If they did not come here by chance, ordinary people would not find it even if they walked along the path 10 times. That's it. Bai Jingze stopped, and Zhang Qingfeng did the same. They pointed a direction for Lin Yi and the others. There was nothing eye-catching in front of them. There were no towering trees, no exotic flowers or plants. At first glance, it was just a clump of ordinary weeds, but under the cover of the weeds, there was a faint bright red outline. The stench of snakes. It really is the spirit knowledge fruit. Chu Tianlu was stunned at a glance. He did not believe it on the way here, thinking that it might just be somewhat similar to the spirit knowledge fruit, but after smelling the iconic snake-like smell, he no longer had any doubts. There was no doubt that this was a genuine spirit knowledge fruit. Linny was also a bit dumbfounded. He was the same as Chu Tianlu. Although he held quite a bit of hope in his heart, he didn't really believe it rationally. Now, however, seeing it with his own eyes was the truth. In such a remote place, with such a ferocious swarm of black insects guarding it, it's no wonder no one has discovered this spiritual knowledge fruit. Bing Wuqing's tone could be considered calm. She no longer coveted the spirit knowledge fruit. Even if Linny offered it to her, she would not take it. For her, the spirit knowledge fruit was far less cost-effective than a top-grade gathering nascent pill. Moreover, she could use this to leave a good impression in Lin Yi's heart that she was not a glutton, killing two birds with one stone. Bing Wuqing was not tempted, but it did not mean that the others were not tempted. Chu Tianlu was still fine. A truly loyal person would normally know how to repay kindness, especially since he also knew his own limits. Therefore, he was only surprised by the second spirit knowledge fruit in front of him, but did not have any improper thoughts. However, this was not the case for the other two, especially by Jingza. Before this, his entire mind was filled with thoughts of secretly keeping the spirit knowledge fruit for himself. Now that his beautiful plan had been shattered, he could only settle for the next best thing. Although Lin Yi's life-saving grace could not be denied, this was a completely different matter. As for Zhang Qingfeng, although he was now prepared to shed all pretense of cordiality with Bai Jingza, his stance on this matter was more or less the same. They had only discovered this spirit knowledge fruit because of the smoke from their ancestors' graves. If Linny really took it for himself and did not get a share of the spirit knowledge fruit, he would definitely be extremely indignant and would definitely curse. Without waiting for Lin Yi to speak, Bai Jingza could not wait to snatch the spirit knowledge fruit. Zhang Qingfeng was not willing to fall behind either. It was unrealistic to keep it for himself, but as long as the first to obtain the spirit knowledge fruit, Lin Yi would have to pay some price even if he asked for it, so they would not be left empty-handed. You guys. Chu Tianlu opened his mouth, wanting to stop them, but he didn't know what to do. As far as he was concerned, the fruit should belong to Lin Yi alone. Bai Jingza and Zhang Qingfeng really didn't know what was good for them. They'd just been saved by Lin Yi, and they were still heavily injured. Why did they have to be so impatient? Lin Yi was not surprised at all. From the first time he saw these two people, he already knew that they had bad intentions. Although birds of a feather flock together, Chu Tianlu obviously did not make the right friends. The two people's actions at this time only confirmed his view of people. Wait, don't act rashly. Lin Yi stopped them in a low voice. Bai Jingza and Zhang Qingfeng's expressions suddenly became a bit unsightly, but in the end they did not lose their reason and reluctantly stopped. They were only 3 steps away from the spirit knowledge fruit. If they moved forward a little more, they would be able to obtain it. Unfortunately, they did not dare to. After seeing the 1,000 wild flame fists just now, normal people would not have the thought of becoming enemies with Lin Yi, let alone the two of them who were quite seriously injured. However, they still did not give up. Bai Jingza and Zhang Qingfeng looked at each other, temporarily putting aside their previous dirty thoughts. In the face of benefits, they once again stood on the same line. Brother Lin, you dealt with the black insects, and just now you also saved us. We will never forget this great kindness, but this is a different thing. Without us leading the way, you would not have found this spirit knowledge fruit. According to the rules of Jianghu, you should at least give us some, right? Bai Jingza said with a dissatisfied expression. You don't know what's good for you. Without waiting for Lin Yi to speak, Bing Wuqing directly used her merciless ice force to freeze him into a human-shaped popsicle. She would never talk nonsense with such scum, and she had a belly full of anger from the black insects just now. Brother Bing, wait. Let's talk this out. Chu Tianlu was shocked when he saw this, and hurriedly stepped forward to stop her. At the same time, he desperately winked at Bai Jingza and Zhang Qingfeng. It was not easy to beg Lin Yi to save these two friends. If they were killed because of this kind of thing, Wouldn't it all be in vain? Bing Wuqing ignored him. In her eyes, Chu Tianlu did not carry any weight at all. If he also did not know what was good for him, she did not mind killing him as well. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.